Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, June 6th, 2023 business meeting of the Olympia City Council. I think we're going to do a sound check. Don't hurt everybody's ears. How's it? Oh, no, not great. Is that better? Okay, yay. All right, June 6th, 2023. Business meeting with the City Council. We are in session. For the record, we have Councilmember partially excused this evening. We don't have announcements, so at this point, I just need a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Takes us right to special recognition. We have two this evening. The first one is a proclamation recognizing Juneteenth, and our council is doing this as a shared reading, and I believe I have Councilmember Madrone leading us off.
Thank you. Whereas President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, declaring that enslaved Americans in Confederate territory were free, paving the way for the passage of the 13th Amendment, which formally abolished slavery in the United States of America. And
whereas word about the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation was delayed some 2.5 years to June 19th, 1865, when U.S. Army troops arrived in Galveston, Texas to read General Order No. 3, informing residents that all enslaved people were now free. And
whereas June 19th has a special meaning and has been celebrated by the Black community for more than 150 years, calling it Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, and Juneteenth, combining the words June and 19th. And
whereas Juneteenth celebrations have spread from the South and are observed in different states throughout the country. And whereas Black community members in Thurston County have celebrated Juneteenth for over 40 years. And
whereas in 2007, Washington State officially declared Juneteenth as a recognized holiday, and in 2021, Washington State officially declared Juneteenth as an official state holiday. And whereas the City of Olympia is honored to partner with the Women of Color and Leadership Movement to host a community Juneteenth celebration festival at the Rebecca Howard Park on June 18th, 2023, and
now, therefore, be it resolved, the Olympia City Council does hereby proclaim June 19th, 2023 as Juneteenth in the city of Olympia, Washington, and urge all residents to become more aware of the significance of this celebration in African-American history and its role in the heritage of our nation and city. Signed in the city of Olympia, Washington, the 6th day of June, 2023, Olympia City Council, Cheryl Selby, Mayor. And now it's my pleasure to invite forward Shauna Hawk, who is the Executive Director and Founder of Women of Color in Leadership Movement. And she's going to explain about some of the festivities we have, and I will be handing off this proclamation to you to share.
This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you all. What I would like to add is that I'm really honored to be able to host a celebration that honors my ancestors and that really brings our community together. And I really feel that one of the things that that our focus is for our celebration is around African Americans' contributions, accomplishments, and resiliency. And I really hope it is a catalyst for African American presence, visible presence in our community. So not just temporary, but a visible, so we're not having Black folks come to town and say, where are the Black people? Where's the Black presence? Because that's, pretty much the case now. But I'm hoping that it really helps to also further the actual breaking of the ground of the Rebecca Howard Park, because we need this space, we need it to start, so it's not just in name only. And also a place where we can honor the vast number of Black pioneers that came to this area, founded things, started things, contributed, both present and past. And I wanted to share a little bit of about the marketplace. So it's not just name in, just in name. It's not just like a vendor space. There's actual history behind that. So as in many cultures, they do have a marketplace where folks go and do, but the significance of the marketplace to many African Americans is when many of us were enslaved. And just want to note that not all Africans that came here were enslaved. We were here before that. But when it did happen, many of us were. And so when that did happen, there was a time that the slave owners would give us one day of celebration and freedom. So we'd be able to share and share goods, trade, play our music. Many communities around our country, but one in particular is in New Orleans, and so they have the Louis Armstrong Park, which is also known as Congo Square, and they still to this day have these celebrations. So that's the symbology of naming the space the marketplace. So that's the importance of having Black businesses, Black organizations, and just to really celebrate that, so there could be prosperity within that community and a celebration of our freedom and honoring of our ancestors. Another thing that I'd like to add to it is we're going to have an edition of roller skating this year. And so there's going to be folks talking about the importance of what roller skating did mean to the many African-American communities. In many of our communities, the rinks were closed down, and that devastated, a lot of the participation and things that would happen for our youth and for our community members. So the hope is that it would help encourage, like we have the ice skating in that really wonderful area once a year, that we could in the summer months have roller skating as well. So, because that would bring out more of the melanated folks that like to be out in the heat, but also have some shade and whatnot. So I'm hoping that that could get started and there'll be that connection, but there will be some folks talking about that and doing a presentation on roller skating. So bring your skates. And just really looking forward to having this be really a wonderful healing, in that space. Rebecca Howard, honoring her name and the many other pioneers. I love the fact that last year when the city had the display up of the many other pioneers in the community, we're going to have that up again too, so people can get educated around that, and we can just honor them all. And let me make sure I got everything. Yeah, I think I pretty much touched on the visible presence of Black folks and wanting to really use these opportunities to make those real changes happen, not just in talk. So that's it. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. What time, and can you give the address of Rebecca Howard Park? Because not everybody knows where it is.
It's 911 Adams Street. I think I just memorized that today. Southeast, Olympia, Washington, 98501. It's going to be from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Sunday. And we also will be honoring and sending shout outs to fathers on Father's Day as well, because we need our good fathers out there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Shauna? Councilmember Payne.
Thank you so much, Shauna, and happy Juneteenth. I'm just looking forward to this year's celebration as well. Last year was incredible. It seems like it just keeps getting bigger and bigger each year. And one of the things that I love about this time of year is that I feel like I learn something new every single year, whether it's around Juneteenth or Pride or even 4th of July. Every single year I learn something new. And what you just said about the slave masters giving the enslaved people a day off that's something I never heard of before. And it just kind of speaks to the fact that they knew what they were doing. There's something important about recognizing the human spirit and the need for faith and morale in people. And so that's very telling what you just said. But it just feels like every year we seem to keep seeing what's happening around the country, and it feels more and more relevant to have these kinds of celebrations. And so I'm just so grateful for you and your leadership to keep partnering with us here at the city to keep bringing this back to our community, to let people know that this place is a refuge for them and that they're welcomed here. So thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I think we'll see you on Sunday.
All right.
Thank you so much. Next, special recognition we have is recognizing Capital City Pride and LGBTQ plus Pride Month. And again, we have a shared reading, and I believe we're starting with Councilmember Cooper this time.
Whereas the month of June was designated Pride Month to commemorate the Stonewall riots, which occurred in June 1969 and are generally recognized as the catalyst of the LGBTQIA+ civil rights movement. And whereas the City of Olympia welcomes and celebrates the diversity of sexualities, genders, and families of all residents and visitors, and
Whereas the City of Olympia commits to making our community a safer and thriving place for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and non-binary, queer, questioning, asexual, intersex, two-spirit, pansexual, gender fluid, and all under the rainbow umbrella. And
Whereas across the country, there's been an alarming increase in introduction of anti-LGBTQ+ bills specifically targeting transgender people and women, limiting their bodily autonomy and the right to access necessary medical care. And more than 489 anti-LGBTQ+ bills, a 1,411.76% increase from 2020. Those bills have been introduced this year that specifically target transgender people, bodily autonomy, and the right to access necessary medical care for trans people. And
whereas since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a wave of bills have been proposed eroding the necessary human rights to healthcare for all, directly affecting trans people, same-sex marriages, and females. And whereas it is now even more essential that local and state governments reaffirm their commitment to supporting LGBTQIA+ communities. And whereas in 1991, Capital City Pride organized the first Washington small town pride located outside of the relative safety of the big city of Seattle. And
Whereas the City of Olympia has been honored to serve as the host for the first Olympia Pride, later renamed Capital City Pride, and every Pride since. And whereas the City of Olympia is honored to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community and again participate in the Capital City Pride Festival themed Remember the Future, Celebrate the Past, to be held July 1st, 2023 at the Port of Olympia Plaza. And
now therefore be it resolved that the Olympia City Council does hereby proclaim June 2023 as LGBTQ+ Pride Month and July 1st as Capital City Pride Day in the city of Olympia, Washington, and reaffirms the city's commitment to supporting and standing with LGBTQIA+ communities, signed in the city of Olympia, Washington, the 6th day of June 2023, Olympia City Council, Cheryl Selby, Mayor. And now I'd like to invite forward Natalie Koblenz, who is the president. Is Natalie here? Oh, is Natalie Koblenz here to receive the, well, we know where to find her since she works part-time at the city. So we will definitely get this this proclamation to Natalie. She is the president and creative event producer for Capital City Pride. I think this is the second year they've done this. And so really, really excited that they are continuing this tradition after COVID. I want to also maybe just take a moment to acknowledge that this last weekend, the city of Olympia debuted, we believe, one of the first trans crosswalks, trans pride crosswalks in the United States. It's on the, if you haven't seen it, it's in the intersection kind of by the Martin Apartments and the Washington Center, kind of 5th and Washington there. Go by and take a stroll across those crosswalks and just realize what an amazingly generous and safe community that we're trying to create here. We were talking about, we were one of the first small city prides, and I wrote down to myself, yes, we're a small city, but we got a big heart. So anyhow, any other comments? Councilmember Payne.
yes, once again, happy Pride, everybody. I want to take this moment to actually mention something that is a little bit on the I guess you could say, not so celebratory side, but this is the time we're living in right now. So I really recommend that LGBTQIA plus people, this is a time of year where we travel a lot, and we see that there is a lot of bills across the country that are attacking us. It's really important that you do some research and look up where you're going and understand what those laws are and how they might impact you. I just found out today that the Human Rights Campaign has declared a national state of emergency for LGBTQ plus Americans. Um, you just heard in the proclamation that there is well over 400 bills that have been introduced in the US, but of those, 75 of them have already been passed into law. So that's nearly 100, and they're going to keep trying. So just remember that while this is a time of celebration, it's a time to also be serious and be cautious and take care of yourselves. Other than that, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you out in the community, especially at our march on July 1st. And this past weekend, again, the dedication to the crosswalk was incredible. It was so great to see so many people with their faces beaming. It was very, very exciting to be in that space, just soaking up that energy. So, and it made me so proud to have the opportunity to be part of this community. So once again, happy Pride and be safe.
Thanks for those comments. Anyone else? Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Sylvia. I just want to add on to Councilmember Payne and give a shout out to my straight white ally friends that we can't celebrate this month. We need to stand up and look out for our neighbors because it's getting more and more dangerous for LGBTQIA plus and Black people and other people of color to do what they need to do around this country because of the political dynamic. And it's up to all of us to stand up and just look out for our neighbors no matter where we are so that they can be safe. Thank you.
A great message going into 2024. We know there's going to be more. So on that note, I think we'll move on. And at this point, we have time for public comment. The city council allows a half an hour at the beginning of their business meeting every Tuesday night that we have a business meeting for public comment. And our public has 2 minutes. There's a countdown clock. For those of you that signed up in chambers, I will call your names 2 at a time so you kind of can stage yourself. We have numerous people also signed up for online comments. And so I'm going to try and get through, if we work really efficiently, we can get through most of these people in the first half hour. We just ask that you remain respectful and speak to city business. And so with that, I'm going to open up public comment and invite forward Angela Moore, followed by Derek Ball. And the countdown clock's right over, should say 2. There it is.
Okay, I'm Angela Monroe. I'm a homeowner in Olympia, a landlord of my own personal rentals, multifamily property manager, realtor, and I work closely with Investor Services, Tom Glaspie and Andre Scott. They were the winner of the Heritage Award for the 2022 rehabilitation of the Angelus Hotel. I'm here on behalf of my employer, myself, my neighbors, against not requiring the parking for new construction. I mean, I feel like I just saw it and it's just become relevant to me that I feel like changing the parking requirement is detrimental to our city, to our owners, to our developers. I feel like I'm for the city building parking garages with solar panels and adjustable parking rates. I just visited the Space Needle recently and I had to pay for parking to go to the Space Needle, and I knew I had a parking space and I loved that. I could visit the city and know I've got parking. I'm for incentivizing developers to build parking garages or including extra parking when they're building an apartment complex or just in general building a parking garage. The influx of new construction in Lacey and Tumwater, as the capital city, we want Olympia downtown to thrive. We want our businesses to thrive and have parking to accommodate patronage. So while there's 1,200 new apartments coming to Tumwater, and I don't know how many to Lacey, and we have that in Olympia, we want people to be able to park downtown. And we want businesses to be able to be visited. So if we're building new developments and not providing parking, I think we're doing a hindrance and a disservice to the local businesses. Additionally, I'm curious if we've surveyed our public about how safe they feel on public transportation. We've got single moms that want to go to Walmart and get groceries. And if they don't have a place to park their car, I don't know how they're going to unload. So I think that definitely deserves more conversation on the topic.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pronounce your name, Monroe.
It's okay.
Derek Ball, followed by Jane Reynolds.
It's been quite some time since I've spoken about Timothy Green, and since the last time, a lot has happened. The first notable thing was that a bystander video of the incident was released by investigators. If you watch the video yourself, I ask you to question the police narrative because it doesn't fit with the video evidence. Timothy was stationary, not approaching officers when he was first tased. The force of the taser caused his body to jerk forward and his hands went flying. After being tased, Timothy does begin to move, but he moves not towards the second officer, but past the officer, proving that the statement that he was running towards officers a complete fabrication. In fact, the officer responsible for his execution haphazardly placed themselves into the path of the fleeing Timothy Green before moving into a position to murder him. The video proves without a doubt that there was no immediate threat to any of the officers involved. Officers were negligent and did not exhaust all forms of de-escalation, which makes the shooting of Timothy Green illegal under state law. The investigation by Capital Metro Independent Investigation Team has now concluded with no resolution for the Green family. They did state that OPD was correct in their decision not to dispatch the crisis response team, a decision that I feel is completely ridiculous. Using crisis intervention team to intervene during a mental health crisis should be the first step for de-escalation. If this is not what the city is using crew for, the policies must be changed. If crew is not equipped or trained for such tasks, we need to make sure that they have the resources and training to do so in the future. Finally, the case has been dumped at the steps of Clark County prosecutor, and I'm scared that it's going to be swept under the rug unless some of our city officials stand up and advocate for the Green family like they said they would the last time I was here. I was wondering, what have you guys done lately? Have you called Clark County? Because I can tell you the Clark County prosecutor isn't returning any of our emails, but maybe he will return yours. So I'm asking you for you guys, especially our future mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Jane Reynolds, followed by Bill Bruns.
Just want to reiterate that we should be focusing on what he just said, and we should, well, you guys should take into account that there has been found no, it's been said that there was no foul play over and over and over again when the citizens and the community can see clear as day that there is something wrong when there are people of color getting shot by police in this town again and again. This is a problem and we need to focus on it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Next, Bill Bruns, followed by Carl Jacobs.
Hello, my name is Bill Bruns. Actually, I get it wrong myself apparently. I live in West Seattle and I work for Washington Department of Transportation. You may remember me from last meeting. I am here to speak in support of the amendments to the Olympia's residential parking requirements. The big question is what does Olympia see itself in the future? Does Olympia want to grow as a city? Does Olympia want walkability? Does Olympia want convenience? Or does Olympia want to continue to grow in a suburban fashion, which you can encounter very quickly after you get out of the downtown core area? To me, the answer is clear. Olympia should try to grow as a city, and these amendments to the parking requirements is a crucial step in that direction. It permits developers and potential home builders to potentially build housing without parking. It doesn't require people to do so. And in fact, I would argue that it will be many years before Olympia would see any change on that front. It just allows people to get their foot in the door and make these changes to potentially make Olympia a more livable, more safe place overall. And that's why I support it. And thank you for your time. Take care.
Thank you. Carl Jacobs, followed by, I had Shauna. I think she signed up mistakenly on this. Yes, this is, okay, you've already spoken. You don't have to. Okay, got it. Thanks, Shauna. All right, so I got Carl Jacobs, followed by Bev Bassett.
Yeah, thank you. For the record, my name is Carl Jacobs. I live on Puget Street, Northeast Olympia, 06. I am opposed to the change to a 0 parking requirement for residential construction. I'm guessing many of us went downtown last month for a wooden boat fair and Mother's Day, and it was gorgeous. I was down there, it was bustling, weather was great, but the parking was brutal. I circled and doubled back and circled again. A bunch of other folks were doing the same. I finally found a spot. It was, had a nice walk, grabbed some pastries. So I understand we're addressing residential parking here, not commercial, but what this tells me is that our community is nowhere near ready to give up our cars, like it or not. So could I have taken the bus? Sure, absolutely, but I didn't. I had a time crunch. Even if I didn't, I probably still would have driven downtown, just like I drove here tonight. So should we then just give up on our sustainability goals and climate goals and transportation goals? Well, of course not. But let's be realistic. The vast majority of us are simply not ready for a car-free or even car-reduced lifestyle. How would we get to the beach or Mount Rainier or go camping or visit friends and relatives or simply buy groceries? A car-free unit does not mean that the buyer or renter will be a car-free household. Like most of us, they still own a car or more than one car and have to park off-site. As you know, many streets either don't allow on-street parking or are of substandard width or have no or few sidewalks. This will be very problematic. So please think about heading downtown or Costco or out to eat or wherever. How many of us are driving versus using other modes? So I urge you to reject the 0 parking proposal and reconsider the staff proposal that was shaped through a public process, and I think is a reasonable step toward our climate and sustainability goals. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I have Bev Bassett, followed by Talana Reed.
Bev Bassett. I live in Northeast Olympia, and I want to echo what Carl Jacobs just said. He made excellent arguments, and I'm here to say that absolutely 0 parking for any new residential development in Olympia to allow developers to make decisions about that kind of thing is to give up control of our streets in the future. And streets are a public asset. And I hear nightmares from people who've lived in big cities and San Francisco and Seattle, and who sold their houses because of parking issues. We have a lot of streets in the poor neighborhoods like mine that have no sidewalks, they're narrow, and to just blanket allow just to make parking free for all giveaway to developers is not wise. It's not good use. It's not good government. And I urge you to make this a more studied process, to ask it to do as the neighborhood association people have asked you to do, and to study it, and then to make decisions based on factual information and not just shoot from the hip and give us 0 parking because you think it's a good idea.
Thank you. Our last in-person person signed up is Talana Reed. And then we'll switch to our online public comment.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. My name is Talana Reed, and my family has been directly impacted by the negligent actions of the Olympia Police Department, Medic One, and a city employee. I recently read an article published in the Olympian, and it stated that this city's Social Justice and Equity Commission raised concerns about the work performed by the police auditor. Specifically, that they raised questions over the lack of validity in findings on complaints versus police officers. In 68 use of force instances and 23 misconduct complaints against OPD employees. I personally complained to the city council about how the investigation or the lack of investigation that took place in the murder of my aunt Yvonne McDonald on August 7th of 2018. My mother, who can't be here today because she passed away last week, said to me a few days before her passing that she hoped that she was alive to see justice for her sister. On June 5th, 2020, Mayor Selby, you said in a press conference held in response to the murder of George Floyd, you referred to the shooting of Andre Thompson and Bryson Chaplin as a racist shooting. It was. My aunt's case was investigated performatively. The family of Timothy Green has no resolve because this city has not responded adequately to the pleas from this community to address these issues. And now with the police auditor, the Social Justice and Equity Commission's findings with the police auditor, it is very important, it's crucial that you all respond appropriately and help the city to get through these tragic incidents. Now more than ever, it's important for me to see this through, and I'm not going to stop until it happens. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to switch over to our remote participants, and I've got Douglas Benson, followed by Ethan Magnuson. Douglas is traveling. You need to unmute, Mr. Benson.
Okay, how about now?
And that works.
Okay, thank you. With regard to the parking, eliminating off-street parking will not eliminate cars. So many cars will be parking on the streets, which means that city trucks will be obstructed from picking up garbage containers, recycling containers, and compost containers. City street sweepers will not be able to work. Plumbers and electricians will have no place to park when making service calls. Visitors will have no place to park. Eliminating off-street parking is not practical. Apparently, the intent of the parking proposal is to increase housing and decrease costs for developers, and the hope that the reduced costs will be passed on to residents. Developers are not running charities, they are for-profit and will charge what the market will bear. Affordable housing will be built when it's subsidized by nonprofits like the Low Income Housing Institute or Habitat for Humanity, or by government. Eliminating off-street parking will not build affordable housing. My position is not to do nothing. My position is to explicitly build affordable housing rather than tinkering with side issues like parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ethan Magnuson, followed by Jesse Simmons.
Ethan is not signed in. I will send over Jesse.
Oh, you're in person. Oh, okay. Surprise. All right, can we?
Yeah, you know, things change. Hello, my name is Ethan. I'm here to speak in support of the elimination of parking minimums. I live on the west side. I'm a renter at an apartment complex there. And it can be a bit unusual to talk about this sort of thing because a lot of people don't realize how important it is parking sounds like a very boring issue, but I think it's really quite important to how our city looks. A city that requires lots of excessive parking, as almost every American city has for the past 60 years, is going to look like every American city has for the past 60 years. It's going to be sprawling. You're going to need a car to get everywhere, and other modes of transportation are going to fall by the wayside. As a young person, I want to live in an America that is less dependent on a car in the future. And one of the most important obstacles in the way of that is how spread out and how difficult it is to get from one part of the city to another on any mode of transportation other than a car. Eliminating parking requirements near apartment buildings is not going to get rid of parking overnight. You are the city council. You know that not that many apartment buildings get built new every year. This is a gradual change that will be impacting people 50 years from now, not people tomorrow. And the thing is, if we're going to reach an Olympia in 50 years that's navigable by anything other than a car, we need to start making the decisions now that are going to set us on that right track. So I strongly support eliminating parking minimums and setting reasonable caps to how much a developer can provide, so long as we continue to invest in affordable housing and in improvements to public transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Jesse Simmons, remote, I hope. And then Melissa Allen.
Jesse is traveling.
Am I good to go?
You're good.
All right. Good evening, council members, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak. My name is Jesse Simmons, and I am the Government Affairs Director for Olympia Master Builders. We represent nearly 500 local builder members from around this community. There has been much debate among our members around the issue of minimum parking requirements. In the end, our members have determined that removing minimum parking requirements is the best path forward for achieving the housing goals that meet the needs of the community. It is, in fact, a cost issue. Development costs are at a level that have become egregious barriers to development in Olympia and surrounding communities. Builders today are often saddled with upwards of $100,000 in cost, often before they can even break ground on a project. A significant portion of that cost does include mandated parking. Parking can cost anywhere between $5,000 and $35,000 per space. I've even heard estimates say as much as $60,000 per space. The cost is inevitably passed on to the buyer or renter just looking for a place to live. Maintaining policy that places such a burden on those who can least afford it flies in the face of every message that we are hearing around housing this year. Everyone says we need more housing. In fact, our housing issues are visible every day for most on their commutes to work. So the only question is, will the city listen? Will the city be part of the progress made towards more affordable, walkable, cleaner, and safer communities, or will the city ignore the evidence of success from over 200 cities across the country, including some the size of Olympia? Does the city care more about housing people or creating shelter for cars? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Melissa Allen, followed by Lee Reiner.
Melissa is traveling.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can't see you, so I wasn't sure. I'm Melissa Allen. You've heard from me before, so I'm not going to repeat what I've said, both in email and speaking to the Land Use Committee about the impact on neighborhoods of the Commission's proposal to remove all parking requirements for new construction. Today, I want to urge caution about local government. Well, I called it extremism, and that's too strong. reaching for long-term goals. In its plan for projected population growth, the city has waived property taxes for multifamily housing developers, increased housing density in older neighborhoods, spent little or no money on infrastructure in those same neighborhoods, and now proposes to no longer require off-street parking for new housing, single and multifamily anywhere, if I'm understanding how this thing has evolved. I know that I'm a gray hair and we hear frequent references to that the older ones need to get out of the way, but guess what? We live in the older neighborhoods. We're good voters and generally support things that are important to this community, but we're not a big city. That's why many of us live here. We want safety for pedestrians and bikers, space for our kids to play, and a reasonable commute to our workplaces. Please look to cities of comparable size and be progressive but incremental in your growth planning. We are not Seattle, and you're going to lose some really good people if it turns out that way. Anyway, thank you for struggling with this.
Thank you. And we are struggling. Lee Reiner, followed by Mike McCormick.
They do not appear to be signed in. I'll try again.
Lee Reiner.
Oh, I take it back. They are traveling.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I would like to bring up the issue of electric cars. I know our governor is pushing our state and our communities to adopt electric cars. This is a climate change issue, a huge climate change issue. Many of us are following suit. If we have no place to park our cars, where are we going to charge our cars? Um, I think we need to realize that we cannot um, have electric vehicles unless we have a place to charge them. My concern about this no parking for developers, what about families with little children? They are expected to put their children on the bus to go to get groceries. Everyone is carrying a sack trying to get into their home or their apartment. This does not make sense. And I know that some people say, Jesse Simmons said that the master builders supports no parking. Well, let's face it, the bottom line is this is a huge boon for developers. They're going to have no parking requirements, so they're going to be able to put more money in their pockets, and the rest of us will suffer. The families, the handicapped people, people in wheelchairs, people that have lost their legs or their arms. We do not have a robust bus system in the city of Olympia. I just don't understand how city council can even consider this when we do not have a robust bus system. What about those who have to go to work and get home late at night? These are the people that don't have much money. That's why they work late at night and they have difficulty in transport. We do not have a bus system that helps us, and we need parking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Mike McCormick, followed by Charlotte Persons.
Mike is traveling.
Can you folks hear me?
You can start.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Mike McCormick. I live in the South Capitol neighborhood, and I'm want to encourage the council to adopt the new parking requirements. If the city is going to meet its sustainability, its climate change, and its housing goals, there are going to be some bold moves that the council is going to make. And we're not going to be able to get there with incremental changes. We're not going to be able to get there with small tinkering. We're going to need to make some big changes. I don't consider this a big change. I think it's a small but important change. I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of people that are concerned about it. People fear change. People don't like change, but change is inevitable. And we need to manage that change in a way that serves our long-term needs. I think this is one place where you need to step up and be bold and go ahead and do it. We can monitor it. You can monitor it. The city can monitor it and see if, in fact, some of these anecdotal fears that are either real or imagined by the opponents of it. And if we do have to make changes, we can do that. But this is something that is important. I want to encourage you to do it. Other cities have done it. Cities our size have done it. As I said, it's a small but important step. Please step up and vote for it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Charlotte Persons, followed by Sean Ferguson.
Charlotte is traveling.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Sorry, there's a little trouble getting in. I'm Charlotte Persons. I live in Northeast Olympia, and I've been an environmentalist, an environmental advocate for over 40 years. Yet I asked the City Council to reconsider the current parking regulation proposal. We need to move to having and using fewer cars to avoid greenhouse gas emissions. But the sacrifice should not fall on our lowest income sector. I'm asking you to be compassionate. No requirements for parking will fall heaviest on people with low incomes. Without any requirement to provide parking for new development, developers will continue to provide off-street parking to those who can buy condos, duplexes, and single-family homes, because those people will demand that amenity. We see that in our own downtown. But renters will have all the sacrifices of finding street parking, especially people in large multifamily developments. By not regulating parking at all, you will cause the poorest segment of our population to pay the price. The Planning Commission's minority report mentions the fact that our current transportation system does not support residents who do not have access to cars, mainly because most buses do not run at night. Some say that ride sharing will fill that gap. In January, when I needed a ride both ways to the dentist, the rideshare app quoted a price of $50 for each way to a destination 4 miles and 12 minutes from my home. I used a taxi service instead for $50 both ways. Whether $50 or $100, those prices make that way of getting around inaccessible for many people. So I urge you to reconsider the current proposal. Please ask the staff to go back and insert language that states that the requirement for not providing parking for
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Persons. We ran out of time on the timer. Next, we're going to go to Sean Ferguson and our last speaker, Karen Clemens.
Sean is traveling.
Good evening, all.
Hello.
I think there is a misconception about what the changes to this parking requirement ordinance are really about. This is not really about parking. No one's taking parking spots away. If your opposition to this change is that it will make parking more difficult and you can't find parking, that's because the City of Olympia does not have a demand-driven parking pricing model, which would cause more turnover in the parking spaces, making it easier to find open parking spaces. Please look up the research of Donald Shoup and his book, The High Cost of Free Parking. This is about the removal of a requirement that makes it more complicated and more expensive to build housing. This is about giving the choice to not include parking. This change will make the process of building housing more equitable. Everyone needs housing. Not everyone wants or is physically or mentally or even fiscally capable of owning and operating a 2 to 3 ton metal machine that is mostly used to transport one person at a time. This is about increasing the opportunity to build housing and reducing the cost of building some housing, and so some lower cost housing can be built without the added expense and the used land space required for parking. This aligns with the city's goal of building more housing. The median cost for a home in Olympia has jumped enormously from $325,000 in 2018 to $495,000 by the end of 2022. We do not have a sufficient supply of housing, especially affordable housing, and this is one obstacle that is within the city council's power to be removed. This is asking people to look past the NIMBY-ish view of possibly having to park a bit further away to get to their destination because it's so inconvenient, instead of allowing more affordable housing, which will help build more people-oriented, future-oriented, stronger, more equitable Olympia. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Karen Clemens.
Karen is traveling.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm here to speak against the no parking required for new development. I live on the east side of Olympia and I've lived there for 43 years. I'm part of the East Side Neighborhood Association and the Council of Neighborhood Associations. I've listened to a lot of information on this, and I just would like to comment on how fast this went from a fairly moderate proposal by city staff to a fairly extreme proposal by the Planning Commission, in my opinion. On March 6th, I watched the city planner, head city planner, present to the city's proposal, present to the Planning Commission. And they were proposing what I thought was a fairly good recommendation, going from 1.5 parking spaces to 0.75 spaces for multifamily use, and going from 2 spaces to 1 space for houses, duplexes, and townhouses. Over 2 Planning Commission meetings and the Land Use and Environment Committee, it went to 0 parking required for any new development citywide. It was a fairly amazing and disheartening process to watch. Of all the written comments, the 2/3 were against this. Councilman Gilman also tried to talk some common sense into things during the Land Use and Environment Committee, but none were listened to. This is extreme. It's not necessary at this point. I do know that we need more housing and we need to decrease parking, but city staff had a good proposal. And it was a moderate proposal, and I see it as what we should do now and not the extreme. You're seeing a lot of backlash from this, and most of us who have had much life or work experience understand that when you propose something new, a radical change like this, going slowly usually works a lot better. I hope that this works if you decide to pass this, but I have the feeling we'll be looking at it again. So thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes public comment for this evening. Is there any additional comments from the dais or questions for staff? Anybody? Councilmember Payne.
Yes. First of all, thank you to everyone who spoke this evening. Obviously, this is an issue that everyone cares about on both sides of it. But I do want to speak to Mr. Ball, your comments about Timothy Green's death. And one of the questions you asked was, what have we done since? Since that time, we have wrapped up the Reimagining Public Safety process. That was a community-led process. So now that we have those recommendations, it takes the city staff time to implement all of those recommendations. One of them is to create a civilian oversight body, which is what we are continuing to explore and look at. And we do have a contractor that we have been working with to bring that about. The other thing that we have been doing is I have been engaging with the city manager on conversations around mental health and race. And it's still unclear as to what that is going to look like and what's going to come out of that. But I can tell you that this is certainly something that I have not let fall to the wayside. The other thing I want to speak to is your comment about contacting the prosecutor. You know, I sort of think about that in a way, and I hate to make it as a slippery slope argument, but I would not like it if an elected official was contacting a prosecutor to try to determine an outcome of an investigation for any reason. So I'm just going to be honest and tell you that I will not do that. But I do hear you loud and clear in what you're advocating for, and just we will continue to do what we can. I have spoken with Mrs. Green a number of times, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with her again because I do feel accountable to her, frankly. And so I would say just be patient and we will all find out together the results of this investigation when the prosecutor is finished.
Thank you. Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. I just want to see if our city attorney could help us understand what timelines the prosecutors are bound by when they do receive a referral for possible charges and when we might expect to hear resolution on that piece.
The prosecutor is not bound by any specific timeline. Their duty is to thoroughly review the investigation and the evidence before them, and then to make a determination. So there is no specific timeline or deadline by which they have to take those actions.
Thank you, Mark. I think one thing I just add is the whole entire courts and judicial system being so overloaded by COVID, we have this weird point in time. And I think one of the things that I know I was on record when we met with the Office of the Independent Investigator with the state is it does not make any sense in the world to refer a case to another elected official in a different community. It should be referred to the prosecutor in our own community who's elected by us. And so that's my sticking point here. And I look forward to hoping that the Clark County prosecutor will resolve, because I also don't feel like it's appropriate for us to be prodding that process.
All right, I've got Mayor Pro Tem Gilman.
I just wanted to appreciate the comment we received and the folks who come tonight to attend the meeting and to recognize that we have two agenda items tonight where we're going to speak about the two issues, the police auditor report and the parking issue. So your comments are helpful, and we're going to have a more full discussion on both those topics in a few minutes.
Right, thank you for that. Okay, we're going to move on in the agenda to adopting our consent calendar. Do I have a motion? So moved.
Second.
Any questions, comments, or polls this evening? I know it's a very robust set of documents, but don't want to diminish the work of staff. But I think we're just going to go ahead and go for the vote. And all in favor of adopting tonight's consent calendar, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, consent is approved. Thanks again to staff. We are going to head now into our other business items. We have three this evening. We're going to start with an police auditor briefing. It's our annual report for 2022. And so I'm going to be inviting forward Tara Parker, who is with Clarity Investigations and Consulting. And she's who we've been contracted with for 3 years. 3 years. So Tara, welcome this evening.
Well, thank you, Mayor Selby, and good evening to the council and all the members of the community. I am going to share my screen. One second. All right, hopefully that's visible to everyone. I understand that you have received the report and the city has either already posted it or will soon so that it's available to everyone. I wanted to take this opportunity to speak with you, not to cover the various details and all the data regarding the many, many things that occurred in 2022, though, of course, I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have about those specific items. But I thought, based predominantly on feedback from the Social Justice and Equity Commission, as well as members of the council and the community, this would be a great time to take a deeper dive and really expand on 4 elements of both the report and the police auditor role. So those 4 elements that I'm going to talk about is that first, in 2022, the council expanded the review of the police auditor to really take into consideration a lot of the community's interest in focusing on ensuring non-biased policing. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing that's come up a lot is what is meant by best practices. So I want to talk about the various things that go into determining what is intended and applied in terms of best practices. The 4th thing is about how do I assess bias and how is bias assessed by people who do this kind of work in general. And the 4th is to talk about the implementation of the body-worn camera equipment, which has been a real game changer, both for the police auditor, but I think the department, and moreover for the community in terms of what I believe it provides in terms of transparency and accountability. So first, I'm going to kind of briefly go over just to make sure everybody, has this clear view of what the police auditor's role is. And on this note, I want, to ensure everybody that I am very eager and excited to work with the Social Justice and Equity Commission, as well as the consultant, to explore what will be the best fit for a civilian oversight model moving forward. And part of that is explaining what your current model of a police auditor does. So I review and track the use of force incident files, the investigation files regarding allegations of misconduct that come from both the community as well as those that are internally generated by the police department. A new item in the current contract is also looking at the department's responses to public demonstrations. And finally, to look at all the policies, practices, and trainings related to all of these items and make recommendations where I think that there is room for improvement, as well as to work with the department and the city where new policies have been developed. And in 2022, 2 big new policies or major policy changes in the case of the complaint investigations was accomplished, and also the policy regarding public demonstrations and the policy regarding body-worn cameras. So big year for new policies. I look at all of these files and have, as you say, for nearly 3 years to determine whether they're complete, thorough, objective, and fair. I seek additional information whenever necessary, which is fairly regularly from the police department around what's in these files and when I think I need more information or clarification. I look at all of this data for trends. Again, making recommendations as we go, and then reporting in the written reports and appearing before all of you. Now, this has been expanded. As I said, these last 3 items this wording has been added to the type of scrutiny that I apply to determine whether the use of force, the complaint investigations, and the public demonstration responses have been free of bias, protect civil rights, and aligned with best practices. So that's why I want to focus on what is meant by best practices. And I want to be clear, there is no golden book of best practices. It's important to understand that what is best for your community is the best practices for Olympia, which in many respects are probably different from Seattle or Memphis or Detroit. Each of these communities determines their own best practices, I hope and expect, by looking at the values of those communities. So the first place I look as my North Star is looking at the values that have been articulated within the community, starting with the police department stated policies and values, which do highlight integrity and respect, and something that, you know, really encompasses the entire community. Also, the values and the plans that have been articulated by the Reimagining Public Safety Commission Work Group, the Social Justice and Equity Commission, the City Council's priorities as articulated in the police auditor role, as well as these conversations, and the city's broader policies and values around equity, inclusion, belonging, and respect for the dignity and humanity of every person. Then coming from that North Star of the values, I look to many, many sources of training, research, education, and guidance on police reform, civil rights, anti-discrimination, and impartial investigations. These are subjects that are developed, researched, written upon, implemented, debated, argued in so many forums. But I want to make sure that it's understood that I participate in the first three, have had extensive education, membership, and certification from NACOL, which I think is really the primary organization in this country that looks at civilian police oversight. Also, the Bar Association. As a lawyer and a practicing lawyer in this field for over 20 years, I continually engage in education around these subjects. And as a member of the Association of Workplace Investigators, which focuses on conducting truly neutral, unbiased investigations. And that also involves a lot of extensive training, certification, and ongoing education. I've listed some others that provide a lot of very, very helpful guidance, some of which I think is a good fit for Olympia's values, and some of which is not. So it's from that and determining those best practices that I want to talk about the specific area of assessing bias. And I begin by looking at what I expect, or at least hope, to see in every, and I'm going to focus specifically here on the use of force files. We also talk about procedural justice. These things overlap, and these items overlap in many respects with the policies, but these are also in some ways going above and beyond. That's what best practices should be, going above and beyond, not just meets the standards, but exceeds those standards in many respects. So I've listed out what we hope occurs in a police encounter. These are dynamic and very distinctive circumstances. So sometimes some of these are achieved and others not. It varies tremendously, but in each case, I look for all of these items. On the other side, I hope not to see indications of bias. The first is, was there a failure to timely engage in the procedural justice steps that I just showed you? That is an important indication. Other things that I expect people, might think are common sense, but, is there interrupting the subject, not letting them tell their story, not treating them with respect, profanity directed at subject, certainly derogatory language, slurs, offensive terminology. Are officers engaged in argumentative language versus de-escalating language? If there are aggressive or intimidating tones of voice outside of giving necessary commands. And same thing with the body language. Is it aggressive? And I want to emphasize many of these things are now tremendously more visible with the use of body worn cameras. There's some additional considerations. I really, and the body worn cameras, again, provide a lens on this we didn't have with just written reports, looking at how witnesses are interviewed. At most scenes, there are witnesses. They can be the people who called for law enforcement. They can just be people who are around. They can be people who were involved in various ways. Are those people being asked about their independent perspective in a way that is truly neutral and professional and conveys that those people are respected, and to really ensure that there's an effort to collect all of the information without giving anyone an impression that the officers are looking for some information and not others, and some perspectives and not others. And then fundamentally, in each instance that involves a person of color, I always think, can I look at a circumstance involving force that is comparable with a white person? And whenever that is possible, and generally it is, at least to some degree, I'll compare the amount of and the type of de-escalation efforts, the amount and type of the force that's used, and the thoroughness of written reports. Although the body cam video is fantastic and so valuable, it still has its limitations. And as you might imagine, particularly in the period of time when there is physical force, cameras can be obscured. Any number of things can limit what's captured in an instance. So it's still vitally important that the terminology, the descriptions of the events need to be written very clearly, such that if I did have to recreate it, I could. So something like, furtive movements, or it was dark. I don't know what that looks like. I need the officers to really spell it out. So I look whether there are any distinctions in that thoroughness of those written reports, depending on the demographic of the individual involved in the use of force. So let's move on to the body worn cameras. Again, really can't overstate what a tremendous value I think this brings to your community, and certainly all of us who are in a position to view this footage for the purposes of oversight. I think we all know that seeing the video of an event gives us magnitudes more information about what happened than written reports can. But much of the value that I did not know I would get is that the cameras are on from the time they get a call, from the time that they are approaching a situation, and they come from multiple officers. In my experience, every one of these situations involves multiple officers. So you are getting information from the very beginning, how it's characterized, what the initial response is, various circumstances that would never make it into a written report because they're not directly answering the questions that the officers are compelled to answer. And getting that view from multiple perspectives from all of the different cameras. Sometimes these files involve many hours of video. So it's incredibly rich information. One of the things I found most interesting is that now through the video, I can really see the officers' communications with each other as well, of course, as the subject, and as I mentioned, witnesses. But seeing their communications with each other provides a very granular perspective on their tactics. You know, how are they deciding what to do in this situation? And on what basis? And does it match the policies? That's been very, very important. And then again, of course, their interactions with community members. I have seen on a number of cases that these officers are entering into these encounters with very deep relationships in some of these scenarios with the people who have called them, the people who are there. They do have a number of environments where they seem to get a lot of repeat calls. And a lot of the folks that they're encountering at these sites know the officers by name, the officers know them by name. It's been really great to see a number of instances where it's clear that they've established great relationships with certain segments of the community. Not saying I see that in every case, but that is another thing that was never going to come out of just written reports. And again, that's an opportunity to look at something and say, it looks like something very positive is going on here. You know, what can we learn in cases where we're not seeing that? You know, what can we learn to bring the good into every segment of the community? And then again, these subtle things of body language, tone of voice, the conditions of the environment, and the timing of events. There's a lot in the written reports that say something happened quickly or abruptly or slowly or whatever. It's very different to be able to watch it for yourself. There's a clock. I can tell how long things happen now. And time is a very important element in assessing whether force was justified. So I want to emphasize, I think these objective records of the videos, we as human beings will still always see things a little bit different, each of us as individuals, but I think they're tremendous tools for transparency and accountability. And then finally, even in those cases where it meets standards, everything's within policy, there is still an opportunity to learn and to use those learnings to enhance trainings, particularly around de-escalation from every one of these events. So I think it's a great value. So those are the 4 subjects that I wanted to speak to more than I was able in the written report. And now I welcome any questions that any of you might have.
Thank you, Tara. You covered quite a bit of your new activity this last year, and it is quite a bit of new scope of work for you. So thanks for going through that for us. Any questions from the dais? Councilmember Payne, followed by Councilmember Wade.
Hi, Tara. Thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if you could just speak to the recommendation that you have in the report here. So I think I can jump to just, the end of the executive summary here. You have, accordingly, in the interest of more fully understanding the department's performance and community interactions, the auditor recommends that the city explore ways to gather, analyze, and report on data related to calls and calls for service and arrest. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that and maybe speak to that a bit.
I would be happy to, and it is such a big subject. It's been abundantly clear and beyond reasonable that a lot of people want to say, well, what can we learn from this auditor role about the presence of bias, how we can mitigate against such ills, how we can detect it, how we can truly improve policing in Olympia and public safety. And what I've tried to make clear is that I don't think that the relatively tiny number of files that the auditor reviews provide a great lens into that. Those things are extremely important to scrutinize, don't get me wrong, but to understand the broader scope of any role that bias in particular may play in the relations this department has in the community, why or where there might be trust issues, and certainly any place where there might be discrimination would require looking at a much broader data set. And what they've done in other communities throughout the country when they wanted to get that kind of perspective is they've started by looking at calls for service. You know, in Olympia, I think in 2022, that there were over 53,000 calls for service, which resulted, I believe, the numbers are in the report, but I believe it resulted in around 3,000 arrests out of 53,000 calls for service.
I have it here. It's 53,335 calls for service, only 0.1%. It resulted in use of force, and in the 3,348 arrests, only 2% involved use of force.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So when I say I recommend, for the purpose of answering these very important questions, I recommend broadening the scope of inquiry and looking at, where are these calls for service coming from? I do not know the answer to that, but I know that the department keeps records. It's not within my purview, so I haven't asked for that information. But I can tell from the work that I do, there are places in Olympia that are generating a disproportionate number of calls. And understanding where, who's calling 911 and for what purpose, what are their experiences with the department, getting that broader view, and then looking, okay, of those calls that are of a nature that could lead to arrest. We've got around 2,000 arrests, or what was it, 3,000 arrests. So 98% of those, someone is arrested without any use of force. What are the officers doing right? 98% of the time. Not that the officers are necessarily doing something wrong when force is used, but nobody wants that. So I think we need to look at, well, what's going well 98% of the time? Or maybe we'd look at that and say, well, who's being arrested? Maybe there's some important data around who's being arrested. Another important issue is there are areas where law enforcement has discretion. So it doesn't have to lead to arrests. Where are they using that discretion? Are there any disparities? Is there bias in the exercise of discretion? I think by looking at these larger data sets, the community could have a much better understanding of what role bias of any type, conscious, unconscious, implicit or explicit, might be going on. So.
Thank you. I've got one more question from Council Member Nguyen, and then we're going to turn it over to our Assistant City Manager, Debbie Sullivan.
I think maybe I will hold mine till the end of this presentation. I haven't seen this presentation necessarily, but I do sort of act as somewhat of a liaison to the police auditor, just in my role as chair of the Community Livability and Public Safety Committee. What that liaisoning looks like is really being the person that corresponds back and forth and checks in every couple of months with the police auditor, and making sure that what the council's expectations are being met, especially prior to presentation. So I will just hold mine until the end.
Go ahead. All right, so Assistant City Manager Debbie Sullivan, and she'll be introducing a couple members of our Social Justice and Equity Commission as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. For the record, I'm Debbie Sullivan, Assistant City Manager, and I serve as the staff liaison for the police auditor. And just to put a little context, City Council asked the newly formed Social Justice and Equity Commission as part of their 2023 work plan to provide feedback to the police auditor on their work, which includes reviewing the report and providing feedback to City Council. And I just want to tell you that the commission has embraced this request. They are digging in deep and they're learning about the Olympia Police Department, their operations, their procedures, their policies, and unpacking the roles and responsibilities of the police auditor. So tonight you'll hear from Genevieve Chan and Parfait Basale, the co-chairs of the commission, on the review of their first report. Before I turn it over, I do want to say that the police auditor's report is on our website. All of the reports that she has provided to the City Council are there. You can type in police oversight and a page will pop up and you will see it there. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Good evening. I'm Genevieve Chan and I'm with Parfait Basale, and we'll be taking turns in response to this question. First of all, we wanted to say thank you again to the city and City Council and the police auditor for allowing us to see a draft of the report and to be able to be providing direct feedback to that police auditor and to the city prior to their publishing the report. We'll be addressing in particular two aspects that really we wanted to address. One is the use of language in the report and how the report was written, and also some of the data that was included in that report. And we'll be sharing some comments regarding that. Let me pass that off first to Parfait.
Thank you, Genevieve. Good evening, everybody. Related to the language component of our recommendation, there were two sub-bullets, if you will, with regards to that piece. One is the accessibility of the language in there as it's made available to the community. There were some questions and concerns about it being accessible to the average community member in making sense of, how events were described, and just being able to digest that information, because we want to make sure that everybody could read that report and make sense of it. The second component related to language in the report was a concern about how things were at times worded with a distance when an incident happened between police officer and the incident. And so that projected a sense of losing sight of the human experience when there are losses, as evidenced this evening by some of the testimonies and comments that were made. Real people are impacted by these actions of use of force. And it's really important to maintain the humanity of those folks in the way the report is written and those facts are related. The commission did recognize, yes, there's probably a concern with legal terms and trying to maintain some sense of objectivity, but the risk of not humanizing those experiences in the climate we're in, and the scrutiny and requirement for accountability can go in the wrong direction in projecting a sense of bias towards law enforcement, which is not helpful for the community as a whole. So that was two of the main recommendations as related to language that the commission had.
And then regarding data, it was really helpful to have the demographic data included in the report. There was questions on the part of the commission regarding other intersectional identity signifiers, such as mental illness, along with ethnicity, and wanting to also address that or acknowledge also that there were some limitations regarding ethnicity designated, because that's something that was information may be collected by the officer, and in the moments of certain incidents, you aren't always able to collect that information accurately. So, but we wanted to raise that as a point in the future reports, when that information is portrayed, if there isn't a way to disaggregate that data, because it is such a small sample set, if there are perceived trends, to be just aware of that and to be mindful of that in future reports. So that's another area of the report that we brought up to the police auditor. And just to reiterate what Parfait and I were saying earlier, and also, with Debbie Sullivan, we wanted to look at this not only as the Social Justice Commission and Equity Commission, but also as a community member. We want to make sure these reports are accessible, not only in terms of ease of access or finding that report, but also to be able to digest and understand what is being mentioned in the report and recommended by the report as well. I think it helps to have as little jargon as possible, but understand also that there are some legal requirements surrounding the language of the report.
Thank you so much. We call it plain speak.
Yes.
Yes. We try to use that in our comprehensive planning. So do I have some questions, Councilmember Huen?
Yeah, even plainer than that. Some might call it plain talk. Yeah. So I don't have any, I really like that one. I don't have any really major questions for you, Tara. Before, as is our new practice this year, before you make presentations, I have an opportunity to not see the presentation, but give you just some thoughts on what council is looking for and have a little bit of a kind of prep time to just chat about the things I'm curious of. So this is more like me talking to my colleagues about a little bit of kind of pulling the curtain back in preparation for this and some of the things that we did talk about. And I do want to respect that, you're coming in here, your role as police auditor, you prepared a report that the audience of the report, as you understand it, is really to the council. So you've written it as such, and you are, of course, an attorney, and then also trained specifically in this field. So with that, so you gave a report just as I expected you probably would. And you covered a lot of great points and incorporated it. So for my colleagues, some other things that came up that I think weren't quite in this presentation during my meeting with Tara is just how did the meeting with the Social Justice and Equity Commission land? And we heard both from the co-chairs here, and that's pretty much Tara's thinking on it as well. And we really talked about, what is that balance between being, really thoughtful with language, trying to be as humanizing as possible, and then also that legal component of it too, where certain terminology you just can't deviate from it for legality. And then also, who is the report written for, right? And I don't say that flippantly, but really, we oversee the police auditor as council. And so the police auditor is really writing a report for the council. And even still, council could probably use some plain talk as well, admittedly. But then thinking, communicating out to the public in a way that could be easily understood and accessible, of course, is still very important. So having conversations about, what does that look like? And who does that really land with the police auditor? Does it land with our communications team? And then there was as well, Tara did work to incorporate in the monthly summary reports that she sends in, and the presentation, some of that plain talking where she can, and then where she couldn't, making definitions available, that sort of thing, and getting more specific. We talked a lot about getting more specific. When you say, I reviewed X number of cases and they were found free of bias, like, yes. And what does that mean? Like, what did you do? We understand that you're trained in it, but what are sort of the steps, if you had to outline it, of what that looks like? And I think you saw that present in this presentation. There was also an acknowledgement, of that the city is looking at what a community oversight model could look like, our community oversight board. So of course, keep in mind that that could shift the roles of the Social Justice and Equity Commission as it relates to this piece here, and then also possibly even the police auditor role. So more to come. And then Additionally, we are looking at how we could responsibly give council and possibly members of the Social Justice and Equity Commission more of kind of like a front row seat of the process that the auditor goes into when reviewing a case, right? When reviewing all of the hours of body worn camera footage. And so how do we do that in a way that's responsible? So some more things that we're tossing around. So with that, I wonder if my colleagues have any questions or anything else that wasn't covered here.
I've got Mayor Pro Tem with his hand up.
Thank you. First, Genevieve and Parfait, I appreciate the concerns both about plain talking the language and also about respecting the humanity of each person who received this use of force as the incidents are described. I think that's important to continue to recognize the person and including the intersections of mental health or substance or other reasons that law enforcement might have had previous interactions with somebody. I think if that's recorded along with other demographic information, that can really help our thinking understand. My question for Tara is how much of this, I guess first I'd say it feels to me like the police auditor position is mostly looking for bad apples, and that that's important and it's worth doing, but it doesn't change a situation like the day that Timothy Green died, right? Whether or not people were following the procedures or acting according to their job description. So how does the police auditor interact with the institutional structures that put people into situations like that where violence is the outcome in the end? Or is your role more specifically about looking for the conduct of individual employees and whether there's a bad actor to root out?
Well, thank you for that question. And I apologize, the sun is going down and I live in the Northwest, so we usually don't shut the shades. I think it really is about the scope of work, that's defined by the council. An auditor is not an investigator and is not an overseer. I receive the information. I make sure all the necessary components are there. I look, and try to discern whether there are impermissible things. And I report that. So when you ask about, what's the auditor's role in trying to make things better, I do believe that the continual conversation and collaboration with the department in improving their reporting and giving them feedback of how it looks to a civilian, I think it's made a difference. I am pretty confident that the department is sincere when they tell me continually that they appreciate that input. I've made many recommendations, some kind of minor, some pretty large, around the policies and procedures and even trainings that I thought would bring things up to the best practices, beyond just what the state requires. And they have followed every one of those things. But that's the limits of my authority. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Tara. I think that's really helpful. And I wanted to say that I do very much appreciate the oversight that you provide as an auditor. And I'm also really kind of impatient for the kinds of structural changes that don't put armed people and people in distress into close quarters. So that's the balance for me, is I think this is important, but I don't want to be distracted trying to find the bad employee who's doing this if we've created an institution or a structure that puts people into these situations.
Next got Councilmember Cooper. I think that's our last question.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. I actually agree with the last comment by the Mayor Pro Tem. I think, I think all of us are looking for the systemic changes. And we've got a pretty good public safety plan moving forward, I think, that will help us get to that. But I'm really intrigued by Tara's her recommendation. And so really looking at what I'll say the other side of the ledger, if you will. And so what is the city's response and ability to move these 4 sample questions and maybe more into the purview of the auditor, also realizing that that probably increases the scope of the auditor and the cost of the auditor. But I just want to see if we have a staff thinking around the recommendations at this point.
Thank you for that question. And I think it's really good timing. The Social Justice and Equity Commission at the same time has taken on this role of providing feedback to the auditor. They're also taking on the role of looking at oversight models. And these are the types of questions that will come before them and the co-design group with the community and the co-design group with OPD as they look at what is the authority, what is the scope, what is the role. And so over these next few months, and hopefully by the end of the year, are short into 2024, these types of things will be addressed, or they will be before you as options. So they're learning about the current auditor and what the limitations are and what the scope is and what other oversight models have to offer. And they're looking nationwide at various things. So does that answer your?
Yeah, I think that's good enough for now. I really do think that there's probably some addition to the story within the sort of non-arrest side of the picture. And I'd be really fascinated to see that. And I also want to just thank Genevieve and Parfait for being here and serving your community along with your colleagues on the commission. We really appreciate you. And you're just so clear and concise. I think you should give more presentations to the city council.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Tara. Go pull the shades.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.
All right. So that concludes item 6A. We have 2 more other business items tonight. We're going to move on to the next one, which is a report from the delegation that recently traveled over to Kato, Japan. And we had 18 people, I believe. I think that includes me. That was the big joke. 19 including me. I was bad at counting all those heads on the bus. So this is a really, really momentous occasion, 40 years of friendship with Kato, formerly Yashiro, Japan. We have quite a history that I'm going to now invite former Senator Karen Fraser, who has been one of the long-standing members of the Olympia Kato Sister City Association. And we're going to beam her in from Cooper Point, and she's going to tell a little bit about the history of our relationship, and then we have a short slide presentation. Welcome, Senator Fraser.
Well, thank you. Good evening. I've been asked to provide a little history of our sister city relationship with Kato, Japan. I'm most happy to do this. It's been a joy to be involved in this relationship from its inception now 40 years ago. It's a joy because this is an effort that is all about friendship, and friendship is certainly one of life's great callings. My husband, Tim Malone, and I were invited to participate in welcoming the very first delegation from now Kato, their first visit to Olympia, and we signed a sister city agreement between the 2 cities there, later re-signed over in Kato, and became acquainted and toured them around the area, and thus it began. Subsequently, Tim and I were invited to go on the first delegation to Kato, Yashiro, and we did the same thing over there, signed the sister city agreement there, and became acquainted with people there and learned about their city. And we received such a cordial and enthusiastic welcome when we arrived. I think I'll never forget it. It was truly heartfelt and wonderful and very sincere. At the time, I was mayor of Lacey. And so you can see that from the outset, this has been a friendship undertaking that has involved the entire area. The fundamental purposes of the sister cities is international friendship, to become friends across the miles, across oceans, across continents, across languages, across cultures. And it works, delightfully it works, and to share our cultures and share our lifestyles. So when the sister city relationship was started, I think with mayor, city council, and some civic leaders proposing it, and Sister Cities International, which is a nonprofit organization, put us together somehow. And I was told way back when that the reasons were our similar sizes and the fact that we each had higher education institutions. But it's interesting, we have some big differences too. We are on saltwater and they are inland. At the outset, the name of our sister city was Yashiro. And that's the reason for the name of the bridge that we dedicate to our sister city. And later it became, the name changed to Kato. And what happened was the national government in Japan gave a directive that smaller towns needed to combine so they would have fewer municipalities. So Yashiro combined with two adjacent towns, and they took the name of the kind of subdivision, the region of their state government, the prefectural government, as the name of their city. But they do not have counties. Everybody lives in a kind of a big city or a town, but no, there's no such thing as a county over there. So I had a hard time explaining that after I became a county commissioner. Let's see. And I've always thought it would be interesting to have a seminar sometime to hear what it took for the three cities to merge. It would be the equivalent here of Congress telling Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater to merge. That would never happen here. So these are among the interesting differences in our two areas. So our sister city effort got off to a very strong start. It has continued to be strong. I'd like to recognize the initial leaders. Lyle Watson was mayor at the time. And our first sister city president was Tom Brown. And in Yashiro, Mayor Ishiko was mayor, and Dr. Yoshikawa was the head of their association. The two of them were very dedicated, made many trips here with large delegations, and they provided wonderful gifts for the Japanese garden that the city has, including some of the major statuary pieces. And over the years, there have been innumerable visits back and forth between elected officials, citizens, business leaders, civic leaders, active citizens, teachers, students. For a long time, we alternated year to year an adult visit and a student visit from each side. So it's been a very active relationship, one of the most active in the state. And Yashiro even sent a delegation to run in the Lewis and Clark Centennial Run from Idaho to the coast. So they sent a delegation to do that. And one year, Mayor Ishiko was the Grand Marshal of the Lake Fair Parade, and they brought a huge, wonderful participating group for the parade. The city has constructed a garden in honor of each our respective sister cities. So in Olympia, we have the wonderful Japanese garden, and in Kato, they've constructed a Western style garden adjacent to City Hall. In Olympia, we've named the bridge, and in Kato, they've named the street. So this has been a very, very active relationship. And sadly, COVID interrupted sister city visits and participation. But now with the wonderful trip we just experienced, it is resuming. It was a fabulous trip. Wonderful people went from here to there. They were very enthusiastic and cordial and sincere in welcoming us. And we are going to welcome a group of high school students in the middle of summer from Kato. So we're looking forward to that, and the Sister City group is working on planning for that. So thank you, Olympia. Thank you, city officials, and thank you to the many interested citizens who got our Sister City relationship resumed, you might say, post-COVID, and may it continue.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Senator Fraser. And we are going to move on to the slideshow now, but we hope you stay with us and maybe you can pop on the screen a little bit later. All right, so slide deck away. Oh, well, we were going to get to this a little bit later, but I think it's worth talking about this beautiful graphic right now. And the creator of this amazing piece of artwork is our own Jamie Heinreicher of Sherwood Press. And we worked, Susan Grisham and I met with her several times, and she came up with these amazing concepts. They were all beautiful. We wanted them all, but we chose this one because we would be visiting during cherry blossom season. And so it was very evocative of that time of year that we would be visiting. And we can't think of anything nicer that we could have used as an exchange. We had Jamie create a letterpress stationery as gifts, and also posters that we gave as additional gifts to the delegation over in Cato, as well as stickers. So this was seen all over Cato. It was very well received. So just special thanks to Jamie for that. And we'll get to one of the other gifts here in a minute. So we can go on to slide number 2. We'll talk a little bit about the visit overview. Oh, I've got the clicker. I'm so not used to. How embarrassing. Woo! So there's the bridge we were talking about earlier in the original Sister City agreement. So this was a picture of the delegation. This was everybody that went over from Olympia, minus one person who was unfortunately got sick and couldn't make that part of the trip. But it also shows the elected officials and also the committee members that host the international visits for Cato. And then here's a picture of the street sign for Olympia. I want to name the delegation members for the record. It was myself, and then we were joined by the Cooper family, Jim, Thomasina, and Maggie Cooper, and then Ian and her friend Ross Boylan came, and then Danny and Danny Madrone's child, Mistea Phelan. Then we had city staff that came. Debbie Sullivan, our assistant city manager, came with her husband, Joe. We had Susan Grisham, our executive assistant, brought her husband, Tim. And then we had members from the Olympia Cato Sister City Association, including Karen Fraser, June Rio, Miyashita, Debbie Macy, Patricia Thulin, Sam Sullivan, Sharon Merrigan, and Jack Merrigan. So the visit consisted of 3 days and 2 nights in Cato, and we're going to go through a few of the highlights of that time. And so at this time, let's go to the next slide. I can make that happen. And I'm going to ask Councilmember Huen to talk about this tour.
Yeah, gladly. So this is, just as it reads, this is a tour of a textile factory. I believe it's called Tamaki Nime. So this is a woman-founded and owned Japanese apparel manufacturer. They're established in 2006 in Nishiwaki, Hyogo, which is about 7 miles to the Cato city center. So very big economic development contributor to the local area. It's known for its Banshu ori fabric, and there's methods used to dye and weave. Yeah, that's right. Okay, everyone's showing off. Everyone's showing off. All right, let's just show off for a second. So there are, okay, good. I gave you a demerit earlier because I didn't know you were wearing any. So the council members that did have the opportunity to attend are all wearing some textile from this factory. So we have Councilmember Cooper. Do your thing, Councilmember Cooper. Yes. And then Oh. And then I have my shawl that I love. It's the Roots shawl. And then we have Mayor Selby. Yes. With pockets. Yeah. Yes, with pockets. And then we have Councilmember Madrone. Where is it, Councilmember Madrone? It's the blue shirt. That's right. Okay. So wide range of fashions, as you can see here, that they produce. So all with this Benchia Ori fabric. And what makes it really unique is that it must follow certain methods and quality standards to be able to be considered authentic. The textile factory makes shawls, skirts, pants, children's clothes, bags, and denim, all one-of-a-kind items, as they all vary with between both traditional and modern making methods, but then also varying in color patterns. So everything you see here is all one of a kind. Their best known item is what they call, I'm sure in Japanese, but English would be the only one shawl, which is woven using a belt type power loom that was made in 1965, which creates a unique pattern and feeling that they say can't be replicated by modern machines. They sell their products to both wholesalers and department stores all over Japan, and internationally to over 200 stores in 15 countries, including this one right here. The vision of the textile factory is to turn the town that they're located in to a cotton producing town. In 2014, they began cultivating organic cotton on both borrowed and abandoned farmlands. It's pretty interesting. They are also boosting net production of cotton by purchasing cotton seeds from growers at harvest and distributing them to local people, so that they can grow cotton. And also, as they look to expand their business, they are considerate of issues of mass production, mass consumption, and then overall global environmental impacts. And what's more, they grow vegetables for use in their factory cafe. It was a lovely tour. There were many photos taken, and they were really gracious with their space and letting us see not only the finished beautiful products, but also the craftsmanship of it. So it's a little bit economic development and a lot of art, I think, and then also sustainability. So all around a win.
Thanks for that report. And, it is unique in this day and age to find one factory that does the actual weaving of the fabric, the cutting of the fabric, and the sewing of the fabric all in one spot. And the marketing. Yeah, just crazy. So thank you. We're going to go on. Me again. So the first night we were there, we had the 40th anniversary signing ceremony, and it was, a packed room. We had thankfully enough interpreters around that we could have great conversations. It included their city council, plus again their local committee that manages international relations, and just other people from the town. And so there was the signing of the I think it was a proclamation or a resolution. I think it was a resolution that we signed, just commemorating our time there, and acknowledging that we want to keep it going for another 40 years. So there's some pictures of all of us. And then at the gift exchange, this is an example of the stationery that Jamie Heinreicher of Sherwood Press created for us. And the picture doesn't do them justice. They were just so beautiful. They're little works of art. And then our local artisan, J.T. Scott, who's a woodworker amongst many other things he does, but he created a cedar box, very simple, but very stylized and very much evocative. Again, I use that word, very much reminiscent of our area here. Cedar's very, very much part of who we are in the Northwest. And I hand carried it on the plane and on the bus and on the plane. And it was a relief to actually get there all in one piece. It was very much protected and bubble wrapped, but now it's theirs. It's theirs. And in exchange, we have this. Councilmember Cooper, do you want to hold up the gift we have from our friends there? and it's a mobile, and they give us a story about this type of fish and why it's so important in their culture. And it's really quite special. And we're going to be trying to find space for it in our exhibition cabinet down here in the lobby. All right. So next we had the City Hall visit, which was fascinating. If you look at the picture in the center, doesn't it feel a little bit like Olympia City Hall? You know, there's just a little, you know, and it was built about the same time. So that was really interesting to go in, but their form of government is quite different. And am I talking about that? Or oh, yes, I am. Okay, so in this picture, at the bottom right, I have Mayor Awane, who was the mayor of the city, the Kato City Council. He welcomed us to City Hall, and we received a tour of the building and shared presentations about each other's cities that include information about history, form of government, population, education, housing, economy, and emergency management. They have a very similar set of concerns around emergency management, specifically earthquakes and flooding. So didn't hear too much about wildfires there yet, but they definitely are very, very good at communicating with their community of how to respond and mitigate for disasters. And we also met Denisuke, who is the city's mascot. That's the bottom middle. And then on the bottom left, you see Maggie Cooper, who was sitting in the chair's chair, the president of the council's chair there in City Hall. They also put us through our paces, where we got to participate in a kind of a mock, thank you, that's the word, a mock city council meeting. Very different how they manage policies. And then I'm going to turn this one over to, I believe, sorry, I lost my Councilmember Cooper. He's going to talk about this next step.
Thank you. We had the pleasure of touring Toju Gakuen Elementary and Middle School, which was under construction during COVID and opened in 2021. I'm going to set the scene for this brand new 5-story school for you. The first place we went was on the roof, where there are 2 swimming pools outdoor, which sort of blew the engineers in the group's minds for sure, but everyone in the group. Outdoor swimming, both for competition and learning. The setting of the school was in the town and on the river. I would compare it to if you built a brand new school in the valley, maybe not in the valley, but right next to the Deschutes River. And in the middle of the school is a courtyard with an open roof, and it's rectangular, and that's where the children go to make their performances to each other. And it was really a beautiful spot where you could just about hear a pin drop. Brand new facility. They had an astronomy room. They had that performance space. The interesting thing to learn about the Japanese education. So in this school, there's 546 students and 62 faculty. They have 9 years of compulsory education, which is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is 1st through 4th, which establishes a foundation of how to learn. The second stage is 5th through 7th, acquiring self-learning and discussion methods. And the third stage, 8th and 9th grade, is refining thinking for yourself and helping others and communication skills. So there was a lot to learn from that. I also want to point out that I'm wearing pins from Kato City. I have a city pin that I traded with the deputy mayor on my shirt. And then I have 2 similar pins on my collars, which are the city council pin that I received from council member Beppu, and the actual chairman's pin that I traded with Senator Komurasaki, who actually represents the city on the Japanese Assembly as a senator and is the most senior council member. So lots of interesting things to learn as we were there. I could talk for days.
We're going to move on to the art museum that we visited. Very unique.
Yeah, so I've seen of this type of arts museum, and I think a little bit of stage setting here, and Senator Fraser alluded to this. You know, Kato's not on the shore, and it's inland a little bit, and it's really kind of I would say an agricultural area where they grow the best rice for sake in the whole country of Japan. And as their population ages, they're seeing more people move into the cities and trying to find ways to bring people out to Kato, both in form of, rejuvenating neighborhoods and providing place for people to live, but also in creating tourist opportunities and for tourism. And so this art museum was one building on a public square that was pretty significant, 5 or 6 different buildings around the edge. And this art you see is actually right out on the square, and it's a little hard to tell in 2D, but it looks very real. And I actually just learned recently the difference between augmented and virtual reality. And so augmented reality is when you see the real world at the same time and something else is in front of you, versus virtual reality, you're totally consumed by what you're taking. And so we went through this museum, and the top right picture is a good example. There's shots like this and different murals in sort of this cartoony caricature. And when you go with your smartphone, they come alive. And so the water will be jumping out at you in a video while you're standing in the middle, or a shark will swim by and want to try to eat you while you're standing in the art display, which was really cool to see the way that they made the tour groups or the visitors part of the art installation throughout the facility. It was really fun for adults and kids, and really accessible, even for us English speaking folks with our smartphones and using their app. And it was really cool. In fact, the mayor was so hot on this museum that at dinner that night, he made us all pull out our phones and show him the pictures that we took while we were in their new museum. They're really proud of it, and I think it's a great thing to attract people to the community.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the last place we visited was the Panasonic Eco Technology Center, or PTech, and I have Councilmember Madrone to tell us about what happens there.
Well, and I don't know why y'all assigned me the nerdiest part of the tour to speak to, but it was so cool. So in Japan, they actually have a federal law around requiring the recycling of appliances. Consumers actually pay a fee when you purchase a washing machine, an air conditioner, refrigerators, things like that, and that fee goes towards recycling the product at the end of its life. So it's a cycle of producing, using, returning, and then using those products again. And they didn't allow any photography inside the facility because these are trade secrets for Panasonic, and they did not want us leaking that to their competitors. But we got to see people breaking down all of the appliances. There's a first step where there's assembly lines, or I guess disassembly lines, where people are taking apart the larger parts of the machine, separating out the different components. And as you get smaller and smaller, it gets more automated. And the various metals and plastics are sorted by how much they weigh, how easily they blow away, if they're magnetic, and stuff like that. Super efficient and really, really cool to visit. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that the federal government established what the fee was for each kind of appliance. And then each of the companies that offers this recycling service, as they've become more and more competitive with each other to be able to take on more business, that fee has actually come down for consumers because it's become less expensive to do it. I would love it if we could do something like this in the United States. I think we're a long way off from that, but maybe the state of Washington, we could start. We talked a little bit about maybe a West Coast alliance in terms of being able to do something like this here, but they're just so efficient with their natural resources and how they make sure that they can be used again for future generations. It was really cool.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So at this time, if it's okay, I'd like to invite the delegation and Jamie that are in the audience and come up and get a pic. Would that be all right? Come on. All right. We couldn't get everybody here, but I just definitely want to make sure we have a picture. And then in closing, I just want to remind people that we are hosting a student delegation, middle school and high schoolers, older middle school to high school. I believe 12 students this summer, the first week of August. And we are still looking for host families. Is that correct, Patricia? One couple more. All right. So you can find my email on the website and you can let me know if you're interested in being a host family. And Senator Fraser, thank you again so much. Sorry we missed you in chambers. Have a good evening. All right. So we are on to our last item of the evening, and that is item 6C. Brought up here. All right. And this is a potential ordinance that would amend residential parking requirements in the city limits. And we are going to receive a briefing on how we got to this evening by Joyce Phillips, who's a principal planner in our community planning and development department. And she will give the whole context and the background of public outreach and what our decision points are this evening. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you. And I will try to hit the highlights. This is a project that was going on for a while. So I'm going to hit the highlights, and if you have questions that I didn't cover, please let me know. So I'm Joyce Phillips. I'm the principal planner in community planning and development. And I also want to acknowledge that this evening we have the chair of our planning commission with us, Chair Najati is here this evening as well. And we're happy to answer questions if they come up during the presentation or at the end. And again, the reason we're here tonight is a proposal to reduce residential parking requirements to help provide more space for additional housing. And so just to kind of hit the highlights of why we started this work, we started this work to help implement the Housing Action Plan, and it's also being funded by a grant we received from the Washington State Department of Commerce. Our Housing Action Plan has a goal of expanding the overall housing supply by making it easier to build all types of housing. And one of the identified actions in the plan is to reduce parking requirements for residential uses, including for multifamily developments near frequent transit routes. So the state has identified a significant need for more housing, showing that over 1 million additional units will be state in the next 20 years. In Olympia, we estimate that we will need approximately 13,500 additional units within that time frame to meet current and future population demand. Most residential parking, especially outside of the downtown, is surface parking, and that can occur in parking lots, in our own personal private garages, in our driveways, in those kinds of places. But parking is expensive and it can take up a lot of space. And so that's one of the reasons we're looking at parking as part of the implementation of our Housing Action Plan. So this is one piece of the Housing Action Plan implementation work. In 2020, the city of Lacey conducted a survey to look at parking costs in our area. They found that the average cost for parking was about $6,000 per stall for surface parking, $20,000 to $25,000 per stall for structured parking, and underground parking ranges from $30,000 to $50,000 per stall. We also looked at how it applied to the cost of development overall. One of the numbers that we came across is in a recent Victoria Transport Policy Institute white paper, where they estimate that status quo parking regulations add about 10 to 15% to the cost of development. In addition to the cost, parking, especially surface parking, takes up a lot of space. It's land consumptive. How much space it takes up can vary, and that's based off of the parking design, the angle the parking's provided at, the aisle width, if it's one-way or two-way circulation within the parking lot and such. But a general ballpark number is about 330 square feet per space. And this is space that could potentially be used for more housing. So we do have experience for residential parking, residential developments when parking is not required. And so while it's true that as proposed, the city would not require a certain amount of parking for new residential uses, that doesn't mean that parking would not be provided. In the downtown, where new residential developments have not been required to provide parking for several years, maybe even a couple of decades now, the amount of parking provided is typically at about 0.7 to 0.8 spaces per unit. And the intention is that the developer would determine how much parking is needed based on the market demand and given the amenities that are in the area. What's the availability to transit? What are the sidewalks like in that area? And what other similar considerations like bicycle lanes would factor into that decision? And that could vary by location. We did a fair amount of outreach on this project. The slide gives an overview of the outreach and the public meetings that were conducted related to this proposal. But just to touch on a couple of them, the city issued 4 e-newsletters on this proposal, provided an online survey that was open for several weeks, and also routed the proposal to all parties of record and recognized neighborhood associations. The Planning Commission had 2 briefings on this topic. They did conduct a public hearing at a 3rd meeting, and then they extended the public comment period for, I believe, 3 additional weeks and deliberated on the proposal as well at a 4th public meeting. So I want to do something I normally don't do when I'm presenting something to City Council. I want to kind of go through the progression of the recommendation. So the first recommendation or the recommendation did change throughout the process. So this slide is kind of meant to help identify that progression. The first draft was issued in February, and it was a drafty draft. There were still comments in it. It was obvious that it wasn't going to be the public hearing draft. But modifications to that draft were made based on public comments and input from the Planning Commission. The public hearing draft was issued on March 10th, and then the public hearing was conducted on March 20th. And that second draft was pretty similar to the first draft with one change that you'll see in the next slide. The Planning Commission held its public hearing on March 20th and extended the public comment period through April 7th, and then had all of its public comments in time to consider before it completed its deliberations and made its recommendation on April 17th. The Land Use and Environment Committee considered the Planning Commission's recommendation at its meeting on April 27th, and it made an additional modification before forwarding this proposal to the full City Council. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the recommendations that came out of both the Planning Commission and the Land Use and Environment Committee in a couple more slides. So the primary focus of these proposed revisions is for the amount of parking that would be required for new residential development. This table shows the primary differences between the recommendations that occurred. So there were basically 4 recommendations that emerged through this process. The first one being the recommendation of staff, then the public hearing recommendations, the Planning Commission's recommendation after holding the public hearing and reviewing the public comments, and then the recommendation of the Land Use and Environment Committee. I'm going to focus here just on the single-family duplex and townhouses section, and then also the multifamily. And our code defines that as three units or more. And so I'm just going to break it down a little bit. The first recommendation was 2 spaces per residence for single-family duplex and townhouses. That's our current standard. And then we would have allowed that to go down at the property owner's discretion, 1 to 2 spaces per unit, if they were within a quarter mile of transit on a city designated arterial or collector street. And then for multifamily, the recommendation would have been 0.75 spaces to 1.5 spaces per unit. The public hearing recommendation kept the single family duplex and townhouse recommendation the same. And then it modified the multifamily one so that it would be 0 to 1.25 spaces per unit for multifamily developments. The Planning Commission recommendation was to have no minimum requirement for single-family duplexes or townhouses or any residential development for that matter, new development, and 0 to 1.25 spaces per unit. And then the Land Use and Environment Committee made a recommendation to add a provision so that for any of the projects that are located outside of the downtown exempt parking area, if there were 5 units or more, they would need to provide at least 1 accessible parking space. And that was in part in response to some of the comments that were made by the Planning Commission during its recommendation process. But it wasn't an easy vote necessarily. I mean, there was some discussion, so I wanted to kind of go through that a little bit. The Planning Commission did provide 1 recommendation to the City Council, but it wasn't a unanimous recommendation, so I just want to go through that a little bit to provide a little more context. There was a motion made and seconded to approve the public hearing version with a few minor amendments of clarification, but there was a motion to amend the motion that was made, which included removing the minimum parking requirement for new residential development. That was seconded, and after deliberation, the motion to amend the original motion passed by a vote of 5 to 4. After additional deliberation, the vote to amend the motion, or the vote on the amended motion passed by a vote of 7 to 2. So the recommendation that came before the Land Use and Environment Committee from the Planning Commission was passed by a vote of 7 to 2. And I just want to paraphrase a little bit some of the conversation from the commissioners that spoke in favor of removing the minimums indicated, and then also paraphrase some of the comments you received in the minority letter. So the commissioners who spoke in favor of removing the minimums indicated that the amount of parking provided would match what developers would need to ensure a viable and desirable project in the different locations across the city, that more options would be available to a wider variety of buyers and renters, that people who do not own cars would not be as likely to have to pay for parking they do not need or use in their rent prices, and that the parking code could be revisited in the future if the desired results were not the outcome we were seeing in the community. Commissioners who were opposed to removing the minimums raised concerns about safety when nearby parking isn't readily available, accessibility needs, emergency vehicle access if on-street parking is crowded, and the need for more robust transit within our community. One of the additional comments was that the amount of parking should be specified by the city and not up to the discretion of the developer. So the minority opinion letter was issued by the commission on May 1st and is included in your packets. And so when it went to the Land Use and Environment Committee, the Planning Commission's recommendation was presented to the committee. Ultimately, the committee's recommendation was to add a provision that would require new residential developments located outside of the downtown exempt parking area with 5 or more units to provide at least 1 accessible parking space. The committee's vote was not unanimous, but it did pass by a vote of 2 to 1. So the draft motion before you this evening does implement the Planning Commission recommendation as modified by the Land Use and Environment Committee. The draft motion is provided for your consideration and convenience, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joyce. That was a great synopsis because it has been quite a journey, quite a journey. So I'm going to ask our Chair of Land Use to give some comments regarding the process there.
Yeah, and before I do, one thing that's missing from this presentation is the climate the intersection with our climate goals. And I see that we have Dr. Braff here in attendance. And I'm curious if we can have her come up and just speak a little bit as to how this relates to our climate goals as a city.
Sure. Actually, Dr. Braff, if you'd like to come up and address the council.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. This is one of those places, there are a lot of them, but one of those places where climate and housing policy and climate and housing best practices really intersect with each other, where the steps we take to advance our climate goals also help to advance housing goals and vice versa. It's really easy when we think about climate action and transportation to immediately go straight to electric vehicles, right? Electric vehicles, they're the solution to everything. It's not quite that simple. It's a big part of the solution. Electric vehicles will help us meet our climate goals, but we can't get there through that alone. We know that we also need to reduce our reliance on vehicles. There's a lot of other reasons for that beyond just the climate ones. There's an important strategy in our climate mitigation plan that focuses on reducing our reliance on vehicles and increasing the efficiency of our transportation system, increasing urban density, reducing urban sprawl in order to allow that to happen. There are a couple of things to think about that we know based on really best practices and also some recent research on what changes people's behavior when it comes to transportation decisions. One of the things that we've learned is that it does not matter how much you incentivize non-vehicle transportation if parking is available everywhere. If parking is freely abundant, if I can find it easily, and even if I have to work kind of hard for it, I'm still going to get in my car and drive to my destination. Doesn't matter how great the bike trails are. It doesn't matter how great the transit is. It doesn't matter how great the sidewalks are. A car is easy for those who are able to afford it. So what the research is telling us on how we change those and shift those transportation behaviors, it's really has to do a lot with parking and changing that dynamic of how much parking is available and how to access it. Another really important piece to think about with parking and when we think about trying to shift people's transportation habits is how parking changes our built environment. So we've spent decades and decades and decades building an auto-oriented environment that is really only conducive to auto-oriented transportation. And so it's a lot easier to get from point A to point B by a car. If we want to help people shift their behavior in the environment, we need to shift the environment. You change that built environment and then the behavior will follow. That's what all of the research is telling us. And so when we provide excess parking, it puts people further from their destination. They have to kind of navigate between parking lots to get from point A to point B. And so it just makes it even harder to make that decision, to change the way that we're moving. So really, it all comes down to how we build our environment that influences how we act in our environment. So if we want to help people make that transition to multimodal transportation, to biking and walking and other ways of getting around town, it really comes down to how we're creating and building the town that they're moving around in. Thank you.
Did you have some other, you wanted to start?
Oh, I got some comments.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Braff. So recall the conversation we had around climate change after listening to Mayor Selby and Dr. Braff present on their experience in the climate symposium in Sweden. After being in a country that has such different values around climate and transportation, one of the questions that I asked is, what is the biggest cultural barrier for achieving these same values in the United States and in our own city? And I think we're seeing this challenge play out in these conversations around parking. The Planning Commission took a very sharp pivot on the issue of minimum parking. And sorry, I lost my place. And they're asking us to be bolder in our actions. And I invite us all to be curious and ask why. Why would they make such a sharp change, a sharp pivot in what has been worked on. And I've heard this council say many times over that we want to be bold on climate change. We also want to be bold on housing issues. And as the chair of the Land Use and Environment Committee, I seek out bold actions. The Planning Commission has issued us a call to action, one that questions the underlying assumptions that have required infrastructure for cars. And as you know, Dr. Braff was saying, it's a pretty big departure from how we've planned our city in the past. Parking is an issue at the intersection of housing and transportation. It's an area that I've been working in as a council member on the Land Use Committee, Transportation Policy Board, Regional Housing Council. But I bring my own lived experience as well. There was a time for a couple of years that I couldn't afford a car in Olympia. I relied very heavily on the bus to get around. I've heard a lot of people refer to the needs of single mothers. I don't know why we get singled out for these issues, but we do. And I was that single mother. I took the bus with my child. I hauled everything from groceries to science projects. I went to work, medical appointments, college courses, community events. I understand the challenges and the limitations of our current transit system, but I also recognize how wonderful it is. My experience is, of course, my own. Everybody has different experiences. But had somebody asked me what I needed then to improve my situation, I wouldn't have asked for a parking space. I actually had 2 of them. I didn't need them. I would have asked for free transit. So let's check that box. Thank you, intercity transit. It was always a pain to have to dig up the exact change. But I would have also asked more people to join me on the transit system, to build demand for more frequent services, even if they had their own personal vehicle. Public transit is not just for poor people. It's there for all of us, just like the library is. We build a better, more accessible transit system when more people use it, not the other way around. I would have also asked for more housing options. At a time when I wasn't sure if I would be able to stay in Olympia, I struggled to find secure housing. And you know, if you can imagine being forced with the choice to leave the place you call home, to have to leave a community that has decent options for transportation, for transit, walkability, for another that would have actually required me to have a car that I couldn't afford. It's a really, really tough position to be in. And with the housing shortage only growing worse since then, we really need more housing options. And so, you know, as Dr. Braff was saying, for decades, we have prioritized the needs of vehicles over the needs of people. And that has induced more demand for more vehicles. In Olympia, we've taken some really important steps to shift this paradigm. We've adopted multimodal concurrency. You know, I will say that phrase anytime I can. And that's so that we can charge impact fees to pay for pedestrian, bicycle, and transit infrastructure. We're counting people trips instead of vehicle trips. This year, we're working on ways to fund more connected sidewalks. We are seeking funding solutions for our transportation master plan, which includes a lot of options for alternative transportation. We have a long list of projects to address around ADA accessibility. And the infrastructure we build today, from parking spaces to transit stops to bike lanes, that's what's going to be in place in the future, not just today. All that being said, one of the biggest challenges of our time is how we shape the future within the existing built environment. That is a really tough challenge. Not everyone is close to transit. Not everyone is able to walk or bike for whatever reason. And though we've made some progress, that we've got work to do. The city has work to do for building more infrastructure to support alternative transportation options. And I think we're committed. I think this council is committed. I think our staff are committed to addressing these challenges, but it does add some nuance to our decision this evening. And so I'd like to offer an alternative proposal to the one that's currently in front of us that came from the Planning Commission and then the Land Use Committee. So some of the things that what I think that where we could land that helps mitigate some of the issues today, while also building the kind of city we need for the future. For one, retaining the current exemptions that are in place, downtown accessory dwelling units, not touching those. I think that we should remove minimum parking, remove parking minimums for residential units in the Capitol Mall Triangle sub area. I think we can all agree there is abundant parking in that triangle. Also, I think we should remove parking minimums within a half-mile of frequent transit service. This is defined as at least 4 times per hour for at least 12 hours a day. And just to note, this is already being required of every single city in Oregon right now. That's a statewide change. Washington tends to be a few years behind Oregon in these kinds of changes, but we also tend to be a few years ahead of Washington when it comes to these kinds of changes. I think outside of these areas, I heard someone in public comment say at least require 0.5 spaces per unit. And I think that we could do that. I think that would address some of the concerns that in neighborhoods. I do think parking will get built, more parking than that would be built anyway, because, well, just because of how housing development works. As Joyce mentioned, requiring at least one ADA space for multifamily projects, 5 units and up. That's outside of the downtown exempt area. And then I also do recommend that we retain the current parking maximum for multifamily housing. That's 1.5 per unit. And that's based off of some feedback that we've heard from our friends at Habitat for Humanity and their experience in building affordable housing. I think this proposal will guide us towards a better future for our city. I do believe there will be some impacts, as there will be for every community who is working on bold changes to respond to the climate and housing crises. I don't think the impacts will be as bad as people fear, since a lot of our land is already built out, especially in our neighborhoods. But as we learn to better share the limited land in city limits, these impacts are not insurmountable. And while this action before us tonight could be a very bold move, these changes will come about very slowly. It takes a long time to construct new housing. And there are creative solutions other than requiring parking spaces. We could cluster mailboxes, we could share existing parking, we could even share cars. These issues are not insurmountable. And, it's been said, but let's consider that even without requiring it, parking will still be built. Those who build housing evaluate transportation needs and the options available. They want to be able to sell or rent the homes that they are building, and they'll evaluate the needs for parking in different areas of the city. And the Planning Commission has recommended a review of the impacts of these changes in 2 to 3 years. And I agree that we should reevaluate then and see how these changes are playing out on the ground. We can adjust the policy as needed in a way that is responsive to the needs of people today, while also planning and building for future generations. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Scribbling furiously here. Joyce, what might help is if you could put back up the staff recommendation, the Planning Commission recommendation. We can come back to the motion because I feel it's going to be a little bit different.
This one?
Yes, please. Thank you. That just as a reference for what we're talking about. All right. So next I have Councilmember Cooper, who wants to read a statement from Councilmember Parsley, who couldn't be here tonight.
Yes, and I just asked the mayor if I could do this up front so then I can participate in the discussion and not have it joined with Councilmember Parsley's statement. So I'm going to read it pretty quick. While I'm not in the chambers to vote tonight, I felt it was important for me to state my opinion on the parking regulations being proposed. These new regulations are good, and I would be voting yes for many reasons. 1, these regulations are not making parking illegal. They are just eliminating minimum parking requirements with caveats, such as ADA considerations. 2, our community's youth 5 years ago came to these very chambers and pleaded with us to have our city take climate change seriously for the sake of their future, to have us envision what our world would look like when they reach our ages. We heard them, and we made a promise to work with passion to be a leader in climate mitigation, a promise that was codified via our climate inheritance resolution. Unfortunately, since we passed that resolution, our greenhouse gases have not dropped, they have increased. Without bold action, we will not make our stated climate goals, much less net zero by 2040. 3, lastly, we, like all cities across Washington and the United States, are in a housing crisis. It has been estimated that our state is already 250,000 units behind. In Thurston County alone, we are falling behind by at least 600 units each year. We have a housing crisis that is intimately linked to our houselessness crisis and is limiting our younger generation's ability to live independently from their families and accumulate wealth. What's more, the generations more impacted by our housing crisis are those between 18 and 40 are also least likely to own a car. Their parking needs will be less and will be reduced the stress on parking in our community as the baby boomers drive less and less. In summary, we need to densify our cities. Single best thing a city can do to mitigate climate change so we can give our youth a future to look forward to, not dread. Density means less parking, more housing, and increased transit and active transportation. These regulations do not mandate no new parking. They simply reduce the minimum parking requirements. They are careful of the ADA concerns for our community. Bottom line, there is no issue with a developer or property owner putting in as much parking as they want. That these only apply to properties not already developed and not currently developed land. If I was in chambers tonight, I would be voting for these changes as amended by Councilmember Madrone.
Thank you.
And it should be noted that Councilmember Madrone sent an email about these changes this afternoon. So
Yes, yes.
that completes the statement from Councilmember Parsley.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for that clarification. We did receive your recommendations this afternoon, which was very helpful. So I'm ready to go down the line and see anybody else at this point wants to say where they're going. Okay, I'll start with Mayor Pro Tem, followed by Councilmember Payne.
Right. First, I want to acknowledge that I think it's a good impulse to go more bold, to go further and faster. And I was looking up, so I finished high school and I was on my own renting out at Cooper's Glen at about 1980. And there was 34,000 people in Olympia, and there's 56,000 now. And there was 124,000 people in the county, and there's about 300,000. So we're becoming more urban, becoming a city. We had the same amount of curb parking downtown now as we did when I was a teenager, with more people and more vehicles. So I recognize that that's happening. I think that there's a balance, and I appreciate what Councilmember Madrone was bringing, that we want to move in this direction, but I think we also will make it reasoned. Right. For me, the primary concerns are about accelerating the displacement that's already happening with the downtown gentrification. That I think people will seek parking as has been mentioned tonight, that they'll pay for it, they'll seek it, they'll walk further. And the people who can most afford to rent a parking stall or use a ride sharing service are also the people who can afford the new units that have been built downtown now. And I think about places like Winthrop, Washington, or parks or ski towns like Park City or Vail, or Palm Springs, where there is a walkable downtown and there's cute cottages, and all the service workers come from 2 towns away in their beater cars to drive in and out, because there's no way they're going to live in one of those cottages. And I don't want that to happen. So that's the balance for me, is that I think we can be responsive to wanting to reduce the amount of asphalt and the amount of parking, and that we can continue to ratchet it up as we see alternatives to cars for everybody. But if it's about the few early adopters being able to lease a place to park their electric car, then I think we're just furthering the gentrification of downtown and the displacement of the majority of people from Olympia. So that's why I'm cautious. And I generally think that Councilmember Madrone's hit on a good package, but I wonder about waiting on the Capitol Mall Triangle decision before next week. We're going to be briefed on progress on that project, and the final report was put off for several months. And I wonder about choosing a parking strategy for that redevelopment area when we have a proposal for how we imagine redeveloping that area. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Councilmember Councilmember Madrone, you'd like to respond?
Just a clarifying question. So you're saying like put the pause on the Capitol Mall Triangle until after the study session next week?
Well, I don't know what's going to be in the study session. If, you know, we had the three proposals earlier on of the super size, super ambitious, the moderate one, the modest. I don't know where that's gone, and I don't know what prompted delaying the project for several months. So I don't know how complete of a picture we expect to get next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason I include the Capitol Mall Triangle is because there's so much parking there already. So
And at the risk
it
of
seems like a no-brainer.
Sure, and at the risk of going back and forth, there's a lot of paved area that's private parking lots where my experience of driving beaters after I started getting cars and didn't just have the bus was that if you park overnight in some of those retailers, your car's not there the next day. So it's not necessarily you could park your car there until you need it on the weekend. So.
All right, so I'm going to go to Councilmember Payne, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. So I just want to be completely transparent and state that I was not going to vote for the original motion from the Land Use and Environment Committee this evening. I feel that we've heard from the community loud and clear that they are very divided on this. There are folks that want us to do this, and there are folks that do not want us to do this. I have my reasons for it. One of them being that frankly, I think we've heard a few times tonight people referencing their personal experiences. I've had personal experience with use of public transit for quite a bit of my life, actually. So I do have some insight into that. And I also have some experience with living in a single family neighborhood. And I understand that the parking struggles that we have in that community. And I understand the fears that people have about not having easily accessible parking at odd hours and feeling safe and those are real for people. But also there's a very compelling case for our environment and for the climate. And so I do hear that as well. And so after wrestling with this recommendation, I want to thank Councilmember Madrone for coming up with really a plan that is recognizing this nuance. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time here. And I think that's what the community wants us to do. It's been very clear to me. And, you know, I will say that, you know, it feels a little strange to me to have voted for the recommendation as proposed and then go home to my single family neighborhood and park my car there. And so, you know, recognizing that is something that I think it's important to remember that the community wants us to be bold on climate, but we're not the only ones that are required to do that. This is the climate knows no borders, right? When it comes to this, it doesn't care about the city of Olympia's borders. We need Lacey, Tumwater, the county, the state, the nation, and frankly, the globe to join us in this effort. And obviously we need to start, but that bold action does not need to always be on our shoulders to be the first ones to go or frankly, bear it all until other people join us. We can do both. We can try to take steps towards helping our environment and also encourage our neighbors to do the same with us and recognize the challenges that we have in the present moment while we work our way towards the future we want to see in our community, which I do believe will eventually be less car dependency. But frankly, we're not there yet. And I feel that the original motion is a bit premature. And so thank you again, Councilmember Madrone, for your recommendations this evening.
Thank you, Councilmember Cooper.
Sorry, a little cattywampus in my order, Tia. I'm actually going to go next, and then we'll give Councilmember Cooper.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
All right.
I thumb wrestled him for it, I suppose.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you so much to everyone that came and public commented tonight, the ones that came the last time we were in. the flooding amount of emails that we have gotten. I think even today alone, down to the, the last, well, today, as I'm in my day job and my phone is vibrating, it's just buzzing. I mean, probably every 5 minutes, it seemed like some hours. So I just want to just kind of take a step back. And I know that folks in the room, both virtually and physically, are waiting on us, like, what's the decision, right? But I just want to share some of my reflections of the public comment that has, and the just overall conversations, no matter what form it came in. I really appreciate how smart folks were in digging into the issues, and how really honest they were with their feedback, and really vulnerability of sharing their personal stories or lived experiences. I also noticed some demonizing and questioning of motives and intelligence of different groups of community members that may be for it or may be opposed to it. There was some of that on council too, but we try to just shrug it off. So some of that is, we question that there was some questioning of, the neighborhood groups. They just want what's good for them. They're selfish and all of this. There was some, the developers just want to just fatten their pockets. There was, that there maybe was lack of care for the aging community, or that younger residents didn't have enough experience to really understood what they were trying to be in favor of or talking about. And so all of that I found to be not motivating. So I just want to call that out in a time of just intense, just friction in society. We have what we're seeing a really robust, engaged community, I think. I mean, we are talking about all the hard issues, and go figure that it's parking that's bringing us all together in some way. So I know I'm moving it along. With that, I just, a part of it was also that there were some accusations that, we haven't included enough community members, and that's something certainly we could always try to do more of. But what Joyce had showed was a slide of, I thought, a lot of outreach, a lot of trying to get more, trying to rework things, trying to get more thoughts on it. And as well, our planning commission members, planning commissioners, no matter what side that they voted on, and some of them changed their votes too, you'll see, but are also smart, dug in, have a lot of different ways of living and being into the community and what makes sense to them. And I also, would consider that part of the public process. I mean, we have a big public process, and then we also look to our community advisory groups to just do that, to advise us. And so there has been some emails that I've received and some things that I've just read out in the ether about how dare we let this come this close, this far, to which I think that it's quite ridiculous. We have we go out and we seek these offices, and we have all of these things that we want to do, and we do require really bold actions. They require some creative thinking with the tools that we have as a municipal government. And I believe that we're here today because we had such a robust community engagement process. So that's that. Though moving into some of my thinking around kind of getting to a decision on this is trying to note of what are those concerns that that folks are bringing, no matter what side they're on, right? And I feel that they've been pretty well addressed. Just even in this evening in the presentation we saw, there was folks that talked about ADA accessibility, right? And so we see right there that when this came to land use and environment, that they had amended it so that or made the request that any downtown exempt parking area of plus stalls or 5 or more stalls would have at least one accessible parking space. So that's a good example of it. We have the downtown area that I don't think this is so much an issue of downtown because we're not really looking to change the parking in downtown, right? At least not with this decision before us. So just kind of a kind reminder of that. And then also a lot of the comments of people that are so open and state whether they're a homeowner or exactly the address where they lived. I always get people sharing the address of where they live. And so those neighborhoods, a lot of them, those are built out neighborhoods. Many of these neighborhoods are built out neighborhoods where we're not going to see the types of development or changes really happening in those built out neighborhoods. There's just not the space for them. Of course, someone can convert some of their own property, like maybe they want to build a granny flat in the back. That might be some development, but we're not going to see like the big, glaring, large scale development. So with that, at the risk of repeating everything that my colleague, Councilmember Madrone said, I want to appreciate her service as chair of land use and really leading, digging into these really tough issues. I think that her recommendations are really smart, really well thought out, well researched. I don't think I could say it better as her, so I would like to put my full support behind her recommendations. Sans, there's some discussion, it sounds like, on possibly holding on the Capitol Mall Triangle area. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. Thanks for the time.
All right, Councilmember Cooper,
Thank you, Mayor Selby.
and then I'm going to go.
I was gonna say, you want to go? I don't care. Yeah, I want to echo thanks to Councilmember Madrone. I think that she brought us a package that is prudent for the moment we're in, based on what we know. But I also want to thank the Planning Commission, because I want bold all the time. Like, I want it to be this hard every time, to be totally honest, because that's how we know that we're doing right by the people that live here. Now, maybe not every time, but you get what I mean. Like, it's really important that we have this level of dialogue on these hard issues with the community. And I commend the staff for a what I think is really good public process. It can change along the way, and that's what we need to expect in process. And I appreciate that the Planning Commission slowed down to double check before they brought forward their recommendation. Like Councilmember Quinn, I'm a little bit turned off by some of the fear tactic-y stuff that's been coming out over the last few days. And, in particular, trying to put yourself in the shoes of a single mom. I think none of us should be trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes. But if you go and stand by the Tumwater Transit Center, if you go and stand by any Safeway or Albertsons in town, you can see people getting on and off the bus with their groceries all over our city. Like, this happens all the time, and people are doing it just like people do it in New York, but they're doing it without a metro, and they're making it work because that's either how they choose to live their lifestyle, or that's what their economy allows. And I don't think any of us can judge that. And so I just ask people, when they're sharing stories, to share their own or share some data, but don't put yourself in someone else's shoes and try to say how that person needs to be in 50 years. And I think that, to me, is a couple of the comments this evening are really where I am on this. Is how do we grow? What does walkability and multimodal opportunity look like in Olympia? And to me, it looks like more density. Maybe it's not more density like downtown, but more density like South Capitol, like a neighborhood that's built a long time ago, that's built the way we should be building neighborhoods right now, with less parking and less parking spots and more units per acre than we have anywhere else in our city. And so in 50 years, I hope that some of these individual lots have flipped, but the reality is they aren't going to, because as we found when we looked at 20 years of working in our downtown, if you don't own a quarter block or a half a block or a whole block, it's hard to pull off a project at all. And it's going to be similar out in the neighborhood. You can't just flip an eighth of an acre city lot into an apartment building with no parking, and those things are not going to happen in the near term. And so I also think that it's really important that the comment about monitoring, we are able to monitor this. We're able to put the brakes on a policy at any point because it's councilmanic. We can do that. And so I think, the other thing I want to say is around the climate, and the piece that we don't talk about as much is when we're talking about our carbon emissions is the health of our Puget Sound is driven by tires. Like, tires are killing salmon. And until we have a way to keep tire pieces out of the Puget Sound, salmon will continue to die, and the Puget Sound will continue to have problems, which will impact the health of every single Olympian. And so, to me, walkability equals livability. And I hope that someday we can get to the proposal of the Planning Commission. But for today, I'm supportive of Councilmember Madrone's proposal.
Right. Thank you. So just before we wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit more about the minority opinion, and that in the Planning Commission, it was a 5-4 at one point vote to accept, an amendment that reduced or just eliminated parking minimums. And, we did take into consideration ADU for buildings that have 5 or more units. But there's a lot of concerns about safety in our neighborhoods. And as you drive out into the east side and the west side neighborhoods where there's no sidewalks, there's, people are parking willy-nilly everywhere. And you think about the middle of winter when it's raining sideways and you are working a late shift and you can't ride a bus. It's like, how do you get home? And I just think some of this is really blue sky about us trying to coerce people into giving up cars. I think it's it just doesn't ring right with me that we're trying to mold people's behaviors in a way when we're not Denmark. I'd love it if we were Denmark, but we have hills. And the fit and fearless, yeah, they can ride year round, but most people can't, and they can't navigate through their neighborhoods around cars. There's the whole issue about emergency response vehicles. There's the concerns about delivery vehicles. We're getting a lot of, I'm sure, I'm not going to make you raise hands, but I'm sure everybody here has gotten a package from Amazon. And where do those trucks navigate through these narrow streets if there's parking on both sides, and I think we're just a little, I couldn't say it any better than some of the emails that we've gotten, and really, like you mentioned, Councilmember Nguyen, how smart this community is. And yes, there was some inflammatory talk and, battering back and forth. But really, some of the issues are just really, really significant about moving forward in such an extreme way. And I wasn't going to vote for the Planning Commission or the Land Use, Committee's recommendation. I am considering Councilmember Madrone's compromise. I have grave concerns about half mile from transit. Half mile, all those people, they don't even know there's a bus stop near them. Half mile is too far for anybody to carry things. And, I'm not talking fit and fearless like Councilmember Madrone, that can could lift small buildings, but there are people that have less physical fitness and abilities to be able to do that kind of thing. And so I think a quarter mile from, frequent transit, I could get around if there's anybody else interested. And then waiting on the Capitol Mall report that's going to be pretty significant, and for us to make decisions around that right now, when we have to maybe change it later. So that's where I'm landing, is a quarter mile instead of a half mile on frequent transit. So, Councilmember Madrone?
Yeah, I'm really going to hold to the half mile. It's a 10-minute walk. And I know that not everybody can walk, and that can be a distance to carry something. But that is, like I said, the entire state of Oregon is in that direction. With HB 1110, some of the bigger cities are having to eliminate parking requirements for middle housing within a half mile of transit. That is the standard, the best practice. And that's one that I would hold to.
Okay. Councilmember Cooper.
Yeah, and I'm stuck on a half mile too. Actually going back and forth with Councilmember Madrone a little bit on whether it should just be all the high density corridors in the city, because I think that takes away the distinction and the difference between the Martin Way corridor through downtown and up the west side and the triangle itself. They're all zoned for high density, and it makes sense to me that we would do all this in one action.
It seems like we're clotheslining a lot of, not clotheslining, but that sounds like we're adding another whole different conversation. Am I not? Okay, because I thought.
I think he was just agreeing with me, just in a roundabout way.
Giving my reasons for support.
Well,
Sorry.
it's still based on four buses an hour, right? So every 15-minute service. Where do we currently have that?
Sorry, I had written that at some point in my comments, and in all my revisions, I somehow took it out. That is only from Capitol Mall, the corner of the triangle, to the Martin Way and Lacey. That is the only place where we have frequent transit.
Okay, so is your proposal along frequent, half mile within frequent transit?
Oh, it's a little bit extra, isn't it?
This was from October of 2022, which was the most recent map I had. I would have to reconfirm that with intercity transit.
Okay.
I found that just earlier today.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's some areas in the south as well.
Okay, but that shows a quarter mile.
Oh, does that show a quarter mile?
This is the quarter mile.
Okay.
It's the only map I had.
Because a quarter mile is what I thought we worked with in our comp plan. I thought I've never heard a half mile.
Oh, like I said, half mile is in recent legislation for Washington and is statewide in Oregon.
Huh.
It's considered a 10-minute walk.
In the snow and pouring rain and up a hill. All right. Mayor Pro Tem Gilman or? Councilman Cohen.
I appreciate you, Mayor. So I don't want you to feel like what it sounds like, though we haven't taken a formal vote yet, is that you may have a minority opinion. And I don't want a quarter mile to just like fall on deaf ears and we just kind of, go forward. And also we do need to, this was, the vote would have been on a previous night. So I know that we also need to come out with some decision for staff, some direction. But I'm, thinking about the half mile versus a quarter mile. I need more information. So I wonder if it'd be appropriate to point to staff. Is there something, oftentimes when we try to make good decisions and try to mold it to a place that everyone can get to. And we don't necessarily have to, have a unanimous decision tonight, but I do want thoughtful consideration of colleagues' suggestions, right? So is there anything that our planners experts in the room can tell us when it comes to half mile or a quarter mile? Is there anything major that we're missing here that should be included in this conversation?
The only other thing I can think of to add to what Councilmember Madrone mentioned is that the previous legislation that's from a couple of years ago talked about quarter mile, and then the newer legislation is apparently half mile.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Gilman.
So I agree with the mayor that a quarter mile along that corridor with 15-minute service makes sense to me. When we looked at the map just a moment ago, if you go a mile wide, you might as well just say all of the established neighborhoods, all the older neighborhoods, because you're essentially hitting the east side, northeast, southwest, and northwest if you go a mile wide from Martin Way and from Harrison. And I think that the focus on that while the 10-minute walk could be true, there's more to trying to plan this walkable neighborhoods than simply that transit service that's going to take you downtown. That, you know, and we've got continuing work about neighborhood centers, and is there a possibility of creating other kinds of places you can live in and walk, or live and ride a bike. But I think it's putting too much weight on the fact that there's a bus a half a mile away from you. And I don't think that people half a mile away even think about or relate to the bus. I think, again, the further you go out, the more that decision about what's it worth to try to circle the block to find a parking stall becomes a factor. So anyhow, I would rather that it wasn't a half a mile.
Okay, Councilmember Payne.
Yes, I have a thought. Since we are thinking about reviewing this after 2 or 3 years, can we make sure that we're doing some analysis as to whether or not this is makes a significant difference in residents' behavior to determine if, regardless of which decision we make tonight?
We'll certainly look at the data that we have. It'll include things like building permits, potentially working with intercity transit to get boardings and I don't know what they call the exits, deboarding, I don't know. But I mean, we can certainly look at the data that's available at the time. How much of that will tell us about behavior change is a little harder to answer.
All right, Councilmember Quinn.
Yeah, well, and that's very fair, Joyce. Who's to say that we'd have built out units by then, right? And then be able to start tracking like how people are moving. People usually don't like to be tracked either, so you know it can be tough. I'm open to quarter for this half. For me, I think I'm open to it, and it's I don't know if, you know, and I hate to be so like, can we do, you know, 0.75? I don't know. But I just like feel like, well, I guess it wouldn't be 0.75. It'd be whatever's in the middle. But I just, I think it's a really fair request. That the mayor and council member Mayor Pro Tem Gilman are making. And, you know, I think about whether or not, you know, I'm gonna put myself in my own shoes, and whether or not at certain times of the day and where I'm at, and I've been a downtown resident for a long time and I love it and I live here. And I've worked in and around downtown for a long time. And sometimes I want my siblings to call me if they're going to be walking around by themselves, you know, and so I think about that perceived safety, and then also I think about carrying all your things. For what it's worth, I'm chewing on it.
I think street lighting too. Councilmember Cooper.
Joyce, the map you showed us with the transit, is the high density corridor very much different than that?
I didn't bring the high density corridors, but map to show where they are exactly. But it's pretty much going to be Martin Way, Capitol, and Harrison. Are you talking about the urban corridors or the high density? Oh.
The HDC zoning.
Oh, the HDC zoning. So this is the future land use map from the comprehensive plan. It's not exactly the same as the high density zoning, but pretty much the red areas are going to be your high density corridors. And then you see the hatched areas for the 3 high density neighborhood overlays.
Yeah, in my mind, just as I'm hearing the discussion, I'm wondering if there's an easy way to decouple the transit service from the quarter mile. But I don't see a clear way to do that with just the little bit of map time we have. I do think that most of the places that we're talking about off of those corridors with transit or where it's zoned are built out.
Yes. Or maybe a quarter mile, yeah, but not a half mile.
I mean, but the only place I saw in the picture that isn't built out is the UGA in the north that's all wetland. Like the neighborhoods are built out. I mean, it's the same conversation we had about the missing middle. Like we're talking about how many new developments can be built in the neighborhoods, and it's not very many.
Okay. Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, I would be concerned that if we went down to a quarter mile, we're gonna miss a good amount of Martin Way on either side. I think we'll miss some of the red area where Martin Way is right there.
Okay, well, it sounds like we're a little bit at a stalemate, so maybe we just ask for a motion and then we just see where it goes.
I move that we retain current exemptions, remove parking minimums for residential units in the Capitol Mall Triangle sub-area, remove parking minimums within a half-mile of frequent transit service, defined as at least 4 times per hour for at least 12 hours a day, require all other residential units in the city to have a minimum of 0.5 parking spaces per unit, require at least 1 ADA space for multifamily projects 5 units and up outside the downtown exempt area, and retain the current parking maximum for multifamily housing.
All in favor, or does anyone else want to speak to the? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, opposed?
No.
All right, it passes 4-2. All right, nice job. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks to thanks, Joyce. And thanks for, yeah.
I just wondered if Joyce could talk a little bit about how we'll get to the monitoring of this, because I think it's important to make sure, and I don't know if that comes to land use later.
Oh my God, can we talk about it in the late?
That's fine. But I think it's really important that we don't let that go.
Yeah, yeah. I think monitoring will be quite interesting. All right, thanks, everybody. City Manager, Jay Burney.
Just one more on this one too, that came up as a question from a couple of you, is about how where this goes from here.
Yeah.
So this will come back to you as amended on June 20th on first reading.
Okay.
Then it will need to have a second reading on July 11th. And then there's a 30-day window before it takes effect. So we're into, for those wondering about schedule when this takes effect, it's around mid-August when this becomes effective.
Okay, great. Mayor's report, I think I spoke earlier about the crosswalk dedication this last weekend and all the wonderful things we have scheduled for the month of June around Pride and Juneteenth. So please check out our website. You can find out where you need to be when. All right, that's all I got. Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. Nothing to report. I just want to ask for thoughts for the family of the late Senator John McCoy, who passed away today. Just judging by your faces, everybody knows who he is. If you had an opportunity to ever meet him or work with him, he was a very special human being, tribal leader in our state and a government leader in our state, and just one of the good ones. It was a hard one to see him leave our walking earth.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Nguyen.
It's been a long night. I'll email you my reports.
Thank
It's nothing
you.
too juicy.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem Gilman.
2 quick bits of good news. Yesterday, the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee met to consider county-wide growth things. And one of the 3 items we were looking at was legislation that's required that we do a better job of considering cultural resources of tribes, and also a better job of bringing tribes in to participating in land use planning efforts. And so it was a good conversation, and we had both Chehalis tribe and Nisqually tribe representatives at the table. So I was really pleased with that. And then I got to follow up this afternoon by hosting Nisqually Council coming to intercity transit and touring the facility and talking about partnership opportunities there. So it was just 2 positive tribal relations things. So.
Thanks for that report out. Next, I have Councilmember Payne.
I'm actually going to hold my report until the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Madrone.
Because we love controversial issues in the Land Use and Environment Committee. We talked about the multifamily tax exemption at our last meeting. Not agreement among us once again on this issue. And we didn't make a formal recommendation. We have some staff recommendations that came to us that were still being shaped, and there was some information that we were made aware of, actually all of us, thanks to some questions asked by Mayor Pro Tem Gilman, actually around how the tax burden of the assessed property is applied across the community. And we've asked our finance director to dig into that to see how that plays out. But we did say that we, at least two of us on the committee said, let's go ahead and move this on to council because we felt confident enough to move it along for full council discussion. Last time we had a study session on this, every one of you was on a different page. So we want to see if things are heading in the right direction. We did recommend that it come forward as a business item since our schedule is so packed and limited this year. And so I know Jay is briefing you all on the particulars of that, so I won't get into it. Sea level rise group met. We are going to be bringing a budget proposal to the collaborative in terms of how our staff time is compensated or paid for by the whole group. And also we are unsure of who's going to be the staff working on it at the port with Lisa moving on over to Tumwater and Lisa Parks. And then just a couple of things. World Oceans Day is on Saturday from 11 to 3 at Heritage Park. The program starts at noon. We're going to hear from Chairman Peters, Representative Dolio, County Commissioner Tymenser. It's going to be a lot of fun. Please join us. And also, Robert Cam is not here this evening to let you all know that they did a really, really fun project at TCTV called Live at 5. It's their version of Saturday Night Live, and he wanted me to make sure you all knew about it. That's my report.
All right, thank you for that. Any questions for Councilmember Madrone? All right, City Manager, your report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know the hour's late. I have two quick items. Well, one quick item, one might need a little conversation. The first is we've all known about who Paul Simmons is as a leader in the parks community in Olympia. I think a lot of you know that Paul has also been a very active leader at the state level around parks. And a week and a half ago, the Washington Recreation and Parks Association recognized Paul, and they've awarded him their Impact and Influence Award. And it is the highest recognition bestowed by WRPA on any individual. It recognizes an individual's dedication and achievement in the field of parks and recreation, and the individual selected must be equal in mind, character, and professionalism to those that have preceded him or her. So I just want to recognize Paul and congratulate him on this honor. We'll have some more time to talk about this and further updates with parks, but I want to make you aware of this because it's a big deal within the parks realm for Paul. So congratulations,
Like a
Paul.
special recognition coming up. And at first I thought you were going on and saying he was getting hired, and I was just like, no.
No. Second, my second item is your mid-year retreat is coming up on Saturday the 17th. Normally, I try really hard to get the final version of the agenda on a consent calendar in front of you with getting all of the data together from the survey and making sure we had all the components and working this really hard with our consultant team. We just completed the agenda within the last day or two. And so I send it out to you in advance, and I'm hoping that you can give me a little bit of feedback tonight or some consensus that it is aligned with what you were expecting. It is very closely aligned with the recommendations of the Committee of the Chairs in terms of the topics that they asked to be put on the agenda. So I think we've covered that, including an art break during lunch is something we have planned as well. So I'm hoping you all had a chance to take a quick peek at it and can give me just some thumbs up that it looks good. Or if there's something that sticks out to you that needs to be modified, I'll make that change. And then it'll be in your packets this weekend for the following week.
Wonderful. Everybody thumbs up. You wore us down.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, with no further business before the Olympia City Council, we're adjourned.